Nadu Dr. Ambedkar Law University, moderator for today's training program. Welcome you all to day 2 of a 3-day national training program on sustainable coastal community-based disaster risk reduction, jointly organized by the Tamil Nadu Dr. Ambedkar Law University, Chennai, and National Institute of Disaster Management, Ministry of Home Affairs, Government of India, New Delhi. I welcome the patrons of the event, Professor Dr. N.S. Santosh Kumar, Honorable Vice Chancellor, the Tamil Nadu Dr. Ambedkar Law University, Chennai, and also I welcome Major General Manoj Kumar Bindar, Executive Director, NIDM. And as we all know that this is the day 2 of the program, today we will be looking at community crisis and gender challenges in developing countries in the light of the COVID-19 pandemic. As we are all well aware, the global pandemic has put the spotlight on several developmental gaps in societies at large, and we are still studying its impact on various communities and how it has profoundly impacted lives. In fact, every day we continue to encounter new situations and come to know of issues that were hitherto not dealt with. But as we all evolve, we learn to address these fresh challenges and help people cope with them better. We have with us an eminent panel of resource persons who will help us dive deep into the subject and gain better understanding of the same. Indeed, amid stories of pain and sufferings, we have also heard tales of grit and perseverance that have helped many to cope with realities. Some of the prominent issues we will try to understand today are regarding those faced by women, transgenders, and so on, amid the COVID wave and extended lockdowns that have come to define our lives over the last year. In in fact, even in the domestic sphere, increased cases of violence have been reported over the past few months, which has made us realize that the space most of us see as a safe haven, our home, may not be as safe for many who live in abusive relationships. There are many whose livelihoods have been disrupted because of the current situation. There are indeed too many questions staring at us and too few answers at the moment. Let us try to unravel them one by one in our quest for improvement. Without further delay, let me invite the first speaker of the day. The first speaker is Dr. Ragitha Radhakrishnan, Head of the Department of Psychology, Dr. MGR Janaki College of Arts and Science for Women, Chennai, and also a visiting faculty at Dr. MGR Institute of Special Education and Research and Balavidyalaya Teacher Training Institute, awarded by ULEX Private Solutions as an outstanding faculty in Arts and Science College on India. He was an excellent student and gold medalist at university level. He has published 14 articles in national and international journals and won 2 Best Paper Awards in international conferences and edited a book, Transitions, and a keynote speaker and resource person for numerous conferences, seminars, workshops, and webinars. A doctoral research was based on developing resilience among students with hearing impairment. She is actively involved in counseling school and college students and work extensively to cater to the mental health needs of students with disability. I invite you, madam. Over to you, madam.
Thank you, ma'am. And I'm very happy to be here. My warm thanks to TNTLU and the organizers for giving me an opportunity here. So today I would be talking about the impact of lockdown on women. I'll just share my slide. Yes. Okay. So I
Yes,
would be
ma'am.
talking on the impact of lockdown on women. So we have all been facing a lockdown, or we have been into a lockdown at home for the past more than a year. So we would be talking with the status of women in our society as a backdrop. So when we see the whole life of a woman, they are being discriminated, they are being facing issues even before they were born. So we have sex selective abortion, we have they have a lot of issues they face during their childhood, like even discrimination at home, at regarding what they eat also, and they have genital female mutilation, they have nutritional problems, and once they reach the next stage into adolescence or adulthood, then they face issues such as unwanted pregnancies, sexually transmitted diseases, abuse, unprotected substance abuse. And once they cross this adulthood and they reach old age, then they have a lot of issues which are connected to their quality of life. They go through neglect, or they face neglect all throughout their lives. In many situations they are not acknowledged. The problems that women face are not acknowledged. They don't get the benefits from the society. They face violence, they face a lot of pressure from the society. So considering these issues to already be there, how has this lockdown impacted women even more? So we have been talking about gender equality. We have had several waves of feminism. We have been talking about women's rights. So yes, we have made a considerable level of progress, but the current scenario, or the COVID-19 situation, can actually reverse the limited progress that we have already made. So there are a lot of inequalities which are there. So the different issues that we are facing right now, such as the social issues, the vulnerabilities that are there, the political issues, the economic systems, or the discrimination that they face, can all amplify once because of this particular pandemic. And this has been published by the United Nations in 2020. So a year, more than a year after that, we can see the impact that it has already made. So when we look at the global scenario, we can see that women generally, they earn less, they save less, the job security that they have is definitely less, and most of the women we can see are employed in the informal sector. So they are not protected much. So women, we consider them to be more resilient. They are supposed to be, able to handle more of pressure, able to, easily being able to manage more of physical and mental pain. But when it comes to an economic shock, the capacity to absorb that is much less, mainly because most of the women are dependent on the male members of the family, the lack of financial literacy. All these issues cause them to have a lesser capacity to absorb economic shocks. And they also have less access to the social protections which are there in the society. So, and it has seen that even in Western countries, mothers are much more likely to quit their job because of the lockdown, because of the extra pressures that they have, or because of the lack of job security. There is a much higher chance for women, or particularly mothers, to quit their jobs because of the lockdown. So 740 million women are employed in the informal sector, especially in the developing nations. So this is more than two-thirds of the. So this is amounting to around two-thirds of the female employment. So what happens is, if it is such kind of an informal job, then the chances for these jobs to disappear once a lockdown is there is much higher. The chances for these women to continue to have a financial backup during the lockdown is much less. And most of the industries which were hardly hit by COVID, like the food service, the entertainment sectors, there are a lot of women who are working here, 510 million women globally. So this is much more than the proportion of men who work in this particular area. And like we can understand that there would be a larger number of women who actually lost their jobs during the lockdown. And we all know that we have domestic workers who might have been coming to our house, or we might be knowing them personally. So 80% of the domestic workers, the domestic help, so the housemates, as many of us call them, are women, and 72% of them have lost their jobs. So the number of people who pay them, even if they don't come for work, are very less. So this has drastically affected their quality of life. And when we talk about them not being able to come for their job, it is not just about them. It influences their whole family, their children, their education, everything. So just by it should we should we should be able to see this in a wider perspective. So when we say that 72% of the domestic workers have lost their jobs, then imagine the magnitude it has on their families. So this is again a report that was given by the UN. This is a projection of how the women and men would be living in poverty. The number of men and women would be living in poverty in 2030. So before COVID-19, if you see, the number of men and women were 195 million and 206 million. But again, like adjusted forecast after COVID is 221 and 232. So again, there is a significant increase in the number of women who would be having a poor lifestyle or who would be living in poverty by the time we are in 2030. So when we talk about lockdown, then we had all our schools being closed. So the women who were at home, they lose access to paid work. So it's not always just the paid work. There is a lot of unpaid work that the women do too. So they always had an increase in the unpaid labor. They had to take care of their children, not just when they were not in, when they were back from school the whole day. They had to take care of their online classes. They had to take care of the family the whole day. So like preparing food. So all these things, taking care of the sick people at home, because the house helps won't be coming, or the whole work was dumped on the women at home. So disproportionately, we can see that these responsibilities were falling on the women who were at home. So women, as I told you, they are considered to be shock absorbers. So yes, there was a lot of acknowledgement of women, but when we see about how many sacrifices they have made or the negative implications that this had, then we can see that it has had a very big impact on their autonomy, their freedom, their economic security. And women who are working from home, most of them, they had to they had to depend on online sources, so they had to face a lot of cyber violence, zoom bombing, sexual harassment, cyber issues, online stalking. So yes, there were issues that women faced in all these areas. So when we come to the frontline workers, 70% of the health workers worldwide are women. So we can talk about it as them being underpaid workers, or the PPE kits not fitting them, or the number of people who never had access to the PPE kits, those who had to be in long contact with the sick people, those who had to go and screen them, those who had to go and provide support for them. So the rate of them being infected were twice as that of their male counterparts. And when we think about the frontline workers, or the people who, or women who may have a chance of getting infected, we just think about those in the hospital. But even we should even think about the people who are in the old age homes or the care centers, where most of them are underpaid and they don't have proper training or support, or they don't have enough of the protective gear to make them safe, or safeguard them from the infection. So, and we also have the underpaid carers who are at home. who also have to be taken into consideration when we talk about the women who are being impacted as a result of the lockdown. Then there is also a very major area that is not much spoken about because due to this lockdown, there has been a very severe drop in the access to contraception, antenatal care, then okay, and not enough health services when it comes to gynecological needs, reproductive health services, not enough access to menstrual hygiene products. So here, like in all these areas, there is definitely, a mass problem that is faced by women. There have been a lot of child deaths, maternal deaths, because they are not able to have enough proper access to hospitals or medical services. Stillbirths increased by 10%. So all these are again issues which are faced by women. And additional unintended pregnancies because of the lack of access to contraception or not being able to medically terminate the pregnancy. There will be a lot of issues like this as a result of the pandemic. And the stress and the anxiety that a pregnant woman goes through may also have an increase in premature births, which means the child would require a longer period of neonatal care or intensive care, which the woman may not be able to afford as a result of the pandemic. And then we have another category of single parents, of which the majority are women. So when we talk about single parents, we have uh, women from all socioeconomic backgrounds here. We have women who were employed in informal labor but who don't have a job right now, women who can sit at home and work, but still they're not able to manage the childcare as well as the work. So we have all these issues here. And then abusive partners, like there was a lack of access to alcohol, so there were many men who were having these withdrawal symptoms and they started being violent to their wives. So intimate partner violence. So there is one term which many of us would have heard during the pandemic, which is the shadow pandemic, which means the violence that is there against women and girls during the COVID-19. So there are, if you see the report by UN, there are 243 million men and girls who are between the ages of 15 and 49 who have been subjected to sexual or physical violence by their intimate partner in the past 12 months. The numbers just keep on increasing. They don't have the proper support systems that they are supposed to have. So when we talk about violence, we all think about bruised skin and hit marks on your body, but it's not just limited to physical violence. We are talking about physical violence, psychological violence, sexual violence, emotional violence. All these things are in, like all these together, we call all this together as violence. So there are a lot of risk factors like low income, the loss of loved ones, the fear, the anxiety that they go through, the inability to move away, so the consumption of substances, all these are risk factors. So there was a study which was conducted in 2020 October, which showed that psychological violence was the most frequent type of violence. All the abused women, they experienced it. Then there was economic violence, and then there was physical violence. And nobody experienced emotional abuse, or many of them, they didn't even realize that they were being abused emotionally. So there can be issues of gaslighting, there can be issues of stonewalling, there can be issues of stalking, but many women, they are not even aware that this is the kind of abuse that is being projected towards me. So when they face all these issues, when there is a lack of emotional support, when there is an abuse from an intimate partner, when there is a lack of social support, it has a drastic effect on their mental health. So they can have anxiety, depression, or post-traumatic stress disorder. The chances of these issues are very much higher in women. So, and like if they were employed, if they were financially, they were independent, or they had a partner, then these were protective factors, of course, a non-abusive partner. But still, women and young people were definitely at a higher risk of psychiatric disorders. So most of the healthcare providers were at a chance of developing PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, depression or anxiety or burnout. And most of this, it reflects or it is shown as a physiological symptom. Most of them just reported a headache. So 32% or more of the healthcare workers, they said that they were experiencing a very severe headache, which was actually because of the burnout or the stress that they were going through. And they also they reported that they had a perceived helplessness. They felt helpless, they didn't know what to do, they were not able to comprehend the situation in a proper way. So, and as I told you, there are 243 million women who had experienced abuse over their 12 months and they were trapped with their abuser. We always think about home as home sweet home, but that is not the case for majority or a great proportion of women because the intimate partner or the significant member of the family might be their abuser. So, and another issue that was there was many, like all the children were not able to attend school. So 1.52 billion were not physically going to school as well as they just stopped studying. They didn't have access to online education. Most of them will never return back to school. So once they don't go to school or once they stop studying, there is a very high chance for the families to get them married or they would be exposed to cruelties like FGM or issues as such. So schools were mostly a safe environment for children, especially those who are vulnerable. They were getting access to nutritious food, to sanitary napkins or other menstrual issue like tools that they required, and they were protected from abuses which they had to face from home. So once they were not able to access all these, then that led to teenage pregnancies, sexually transmitted infections, them getting married off fast or being sexually abused. So when we talk about the insecurity that women are having right now, it's not just about them losing their jobs for a while or not having an income or them being totally dependent on somebody for their financial requirements. This has a snowball effect. Just starts getting bigger and bigger because it's not just that few years that they lose or that one generation that suffers. It can have long-lasting consequences. It just transfers to the next generation. It is not just the negative effects of this pandemic that this has on women is not just going to be there for an year or two. It has a long-lasting effect on the gender equality that we were trying to bring into the society. So, and most of the vulnerable women that who are there around us, they are not the so focused people in our society. They might be the migrant workers, they may be the refugees, the people who are from the marginalized groups or the poor people. So we have to focus on these people. So what can we actually do? So we can actually, the government or the other organizations who are capable of doing so can give some direct income support to the women. We all can actually support the women-owned businesses or the women-led businesses. We can support women workers. We can support, we can do our part. There can be, we can't help everybody, but maybe we can help the woman next door or the one who was working with us as domestic help. We can maybe support them financially or help them to live a living, have a living other than the job that they were doing before the pandemic. Make sure that there is no such thing as unpaid work. Access to professional psychological support. There are a lot of organizations which are offering telecounseling and online counseling on a free basis. But again, the women who get to know about this or women who can access this support, again, there is again a gap. Then making sure that the women get a proper support from their family, extended family, and from the society. So it's basically about awareness and how we can bring about this change. So we all are talking about how we can protect ourselves from the virus and how we have to wear masks, but there is no mask for mental health. So as I told you, there are a lot of issues that women are facing, and there is no specific thing to safeguard them as such. Okay, you wear this mask and then you're safe. So we have to be aware of what the problems are and what can be done to, or what are the protective factors. And as I told you, we have this shadow pandemic. It's not a shadow, it's there. We shouldn't be thinking that it's just a term or it's somewhere it's not right next to us. It's obvious, it's just the awareness or the acceptance that we need. Acceptance that yes, there is an issue and it has to be addressed. So it applies to all the factors that I have been talking about till now. So I'm stopping here. Thank you. And that's it.
Thank you, madam. Thank you, madam, for the informative and enlightening presentation on the impact of women on COVID-19 and during the lockdown time. Madam, you were discussing about the social, economic, and the political conditions which were faced by the women at large. There is no difference whether the woman is working or the woman is at home. She is facing all sort of a violence. It may be a physical, mental, psychological, and the sexual violence. Madam, thank you, madam, for accepting our invitation and addressing the gatherings, the August gathering. Thank you, madam. The next speaker is Advocate Satyashree Sharmila, High Court of Madras, Chennai. She is the first transgender lawyer in India. Madam is born in a conservative family as Uday Kumar. Advocate Satyashree Sharmila did not have an easy life, but she has also never been one whose will could be easily broken. Following continual harassment and abuse from neighbors, she left her home at the age of 18, altered her name, and completed her undergraduate degree in commerce, having always taken an interest in giving back to the community. Advocate Satyashree Sharmila then persuaded law from Salem Government Law College in 2004. There she faced unique problems like accommodation for trans students in hostels and realized that validity is legitimized only by one's identity. Having enrolled as a man, Advocate Satyashree Sharmila could not possibly demand to stay at the women's hostel, but she strove to overcome all odds. I invite you, madam, to address the August gathering. Madam.
வணக்கம், எல்லோருக்கும் வணக்கம். நான் சத்யஸ்ரீ ஷர்மிளா, இந்தியாவின் முதல் பேரணங்கை.
Madam, we are not able to see your video, madam. Kindly switch on the video. We are able to only to hear you. Yes, madam. Yes, madam. We are able to hear you. Kindly switch on the video.
Yeah. Now it's okay, ma'am?
We are not able. Yes, madam. Yes, perfect, madam. We are able to see the video. Yes, thank you, madam.
Thank you. Thank you, madam. நான் இன்னைக்கு வந்து தமிழே பேசுறதுக்கு விருப்பப்படுறேன். ஸோ என்னோட எல்லா கருத்துக்களையும், அதாவது எங்க திருநங்கை சமுதாய மக்களோட பிரச்சனைகள் எல்லாத்தையுமே நான் தமிழ்ல சொல்றதுக்கு ரொம்ப இஷ்டமா இருக்கேன். ஏன்னா தமிழ்ல சொல்றதுனால நிறைய உணர்வு பூர்வமாக நிறைய விஷயங்களை வந்து ஷேர் பண்றதுக்கு வந்து ஒரு நல்லா இருக்கும்ங்கிறதுனால நான் இன்னைக்கு தமிழ் லாங்குவேஜ் தான் செலக்ட் பண்ணியிருக்கேன். ஸோ இன்னைக்கு இருக்கிற எல்லாருக்குமே வணக்கம். முதல்கன்னா நான் வந்து டாக்டர் அம்பேத்கர் லா யூனிவர்சிட்டி வைஸ் சான்சலர் அண்ட் எல்லாருக்குமே வந்து என்னோட நன்றியை தெரிவிச்சுக்கிறேன். எதுக்காகனா இந்த ஆப்பர்ச்சுனிட்டியை எனக்கு கொடுத்ததுக்காக நான் என்னோட நன்றியை தெரிவிச்சுக்கிறேன். நிறைய இடங்கள்ல வந்து திருநங்கைகளுக்கு வந்து ஒரு இடம் பிளாட்ஃபார்ம் வந்து கிடைக்கிறதுங்கிறது வந்து ரொம்ப கஷ்டமா இருக்கு இன்னைக்கு இருக்கிற சூழ்நிலையில. ஸோ அந்த மாதிரி சூழ்நிலையில வந்து எனக்கு வந்து இந்த இடத்துல திருநங்கைகளை பத்தின பிரச்சனைகளை பேசுறதுக்கு ஒரு வாய்ப்பு அளித்த யூனிவர்சிட்டி வைஸ் சான்சலருக்கும் மற்ற ப்ரொஃபசர்ஸ் எல்லாருக்குமே வந்து நான் நன்றியை தெரிவிச்சுக்கிறேன். இன்னைக்கு வந்து இந்த லாக்டவுன் டயத்துல வந்து திருநங்கைகளோட சேலஞ்சஸ், அதாவது அவர்கள் சந்திக்கக்கூடிய பிரச்சனைகள் என்ன அப்படிங்கிறத பத்தி தான் இன்னைக்கு நான் சொல்ல இருக்கிறேன். ஃபர்ஸ்ட் வந்து திருநங்கைகளை பத்தி சொல்லணும்னாலே நிறைய நமது சொசைட்டில இருக்கிற நிறைய பேருக்கு வந்து திருநங்கைகளை பத்தின ஒரு புரிதலே இல்லை அப்படிங்கிறது தான் சொல்ல முடியும். ஏன்னா ஆரம்ப காலங்களில் பார்த்தீங்கன்னா நிறைய இடங்கள்ல வந்து திருநங்கை இருக்கே இல்லை. ஸோ இன்னைக்கு வந்து அது கொஞ்சம் குறைஞ்சி ஒரு 60% வந்து சொசைட்டில வந்து திருநங்கைகளை பற்றின ஒரு அவேர்னஸ், ஒரு நாலேஜ் வந்து எல்லாருக்குமே வந்திருக்குது. ஸோ அது வந்து ஒரு ஃபர்ஸ்ட் நல்ல ஒரு விஷயம் எங்களை பொறுத்தவரை. ஏன்னா வந்து நம்ம ஒரு 10 வருஷத்துக்கு பின்னாடி போயிருந்தோம்னா திருநங்கைகளை பத்தின நிறைய திருநங்கைகள்னா யாரு, அவங்கனாலே வந்து ஒரு தப்பானவங்க அப்படின்னுங்கிற ஒரு கண்ணோட்டம் தான் இருந்துச்சு. ஸோ இன்னைக்கு நம்ம பார்த்தோம்னா வந்து திருநங்கைகளை பத்தின ஒரு சொசைட்டில வந்து ஒரு மதிப்பு வந்து வந்திருக்குது. அது போக நிறைய இடங்கள்ல வந்து திருநங்கைகளுக்கு வந்து வாய்ப்புகளும் நிறைய விஷயங்களும் வந்து நல்ல விஷயங்களும் வந்து கொடுக்கப்பட்டுக்கிட்டு இருக்குது. ஆனா இது எல்லாம் இருக்குது அப்படின்றதாலும் இது வந்து முழுமையா வந்து திருநங்கை சமுதாயத்துக்கு வந்து கிடைக்குதா அப்படிங்கிறதுனா அதுல வந்து நிறைய இடங்கள்ல வந்து கொஸ்டின் மார்க் இருக்கு. இந்த லாக்டவுன் காலத்துல வந்து எங்க திருநங்கை சமுதாயம் வந்து ரொம்ப கஷ்டப்பட்டுட்டு இருக்கிறாங்க. ஏன்னா நிறைய இடங்கள்ல, அதாவது நிறைய பேர் திருநங்கைகள் வந்து படித்தவர்களும் இருக்கிறாங்க, படிக்காதவங்களும் இருக்கிறாங்க. ஸோ ஃபர்ஸ்ட் அவங்களுக்கு வந்து இந்த மெயினான அவங்களோட இன்கம் என்னன்னா பெக்கிங் பண்றது, அதாவது கடை வசூல் செய்வதன் மூலமும், அது போக அவங்க செக்ஸ் ஒர்க், இந்த 2 விஷயத்தின் மூலியமா தான் அவங்களோட இன்கம் ஜெனரேஷனே இருக்கு. ஏன்னா இன்னைக்கு சொசைட்டில பார்த்திருக்கலாம், நிறைய திருநங்கைகள் வந்து நிறைய நல்லா ஹை லெவல்ல இருக்கிறாங்க அப்படிங்கிறது நம்மளுக்கு தெரிய வருது. எக்ஸாம்பிள் இப்ப நான் சத்யஸ்ரீ, நான் வந்து வழக்கறிஞரா இருக்கேன். இன்னொருத்தவங்க பிரித்திகா யாஷினி, அவங்க வந்து எஸ்ஐயா இருக்கிறாங்க. ஸோ இந்த மாதிரி அங்கங்க ஒரு ஒரு பேர் இருக்கிறமே தவிர ஒட்டுமொத்த சமுதாயத்திலையும் வந்து மாறுதல்கள் வந்து இன்னும் நிறைய ஏற்படலை. ஏன்னா இன்னைக்கு வந்து கவர்மெண்டோட வந்து கணக்கெடுப்பு படி 11,000 சில்லற திருநங்கைகள் நாங்க வந்து தமிழ்நாட்டுல இருக்கிறோம். ஆனா இந்த 11,000 சில்லற திருநங்கைகள்ல வந்து எத்தனை பேருக்கு வந்து வேலை வாய்ப்பு கொடுக்கப்பட்டிருக்குது, எத்தனை பேருக்கு வந்து தனியார் துறையிலேயோ இல்ல அரசு துறைகளிலேயோ வேலை வாய்ப்புகள் இருக்குது. ஸோ இதுல பார்த்தோம்னா ஒரு எண்ணி எடுக்கலாம். நம்ம வந்து கவர்மெண்ட்ல வேலை பார்க்குறவங்கிறது வந்து எண்ணி எடுத்துக்கலாம், இவ்வளவு நம்பர்ஸ் தான் இருக்குது அப்படிங்கிறது. ஸோ அதனால வந்து நிறைய பேருக்கு வந்து இந்த வேலை வாய்ப்புகள்ங்கிறது இல்லை. ஸோ அந்த வேலை வாய்ப்புகள் இல்லாத பட்சத்துல அவங்க வந்து தன்னோட வாழ்க்கையை நடத்துறதுக்காகத்தான் இந்த 2 வழியை தேர்ந்தெடுக்க வேண்டியதா இருக்குது. ஸோ இந்த 2 வழியுமே இப்போ இந்த லாக்டவுன்ல வந்து சுத்தமா பிளாக் ஆகி போயிருக்கு. ஏன்னா கடை வசூல் போறவங்களுக்கு வந்து லாக்டவுன், ஸோ கடைங்களே இல்லை, அப்புறம் வசூலுக்கு எப்படி போக முடியும்? செக்ஸ் ஒர்க் வெளியில போக முடியாத சூழ்நிலை, செக்ஸ் ஒர்க்குக்கும் போக முடியாத சூழ்நிலை. ஸோ இந்த மாதிரி பேக்ரவுண்ட் இருக்கிறதுனால வந்து அவங்களுக்கு வந்து சுத்தமா இன்கம்ங்கிறது வந்து 0 லெவல்ல வந்துடுது. 2வது எங்க திருநங்கைகளோட வாழ்வாதாரம் எப்படின்னா இந்த 2 இதுல இருந்து தான் இன்கம். ஸோ அவங்களுக்கு வந்து சேவிங் அப்படி பேலன்ஸ், பேங்க் பேலன்ஸ் சேவிங்ஸ் இருக்குது அப்படின்னு சொன்னா கிடையாது. அன்னநாடு என்ன வருமானம் எடுத்துட்டு வராங்களோ அதை வச்சுதான் அவங்களோட வாழ்வாதாரங்களை வந்து நடத்திட்டு இருக்கிறாங்க. 2வது நார்மல் பீப்புளோட
Madam, we are not able to hear you. Madam, we are not able to hear you. Audio is not there.
Ma'am, hello.
Yes, now it's clear, madam.
ஓகே. அந்த இன்கம் வந்து கரெக்டா இல்லாததுனால நிறைய விஷயங்கள்ல நாங்க வந்து அடிபடுற மாதிரி இருக்கு. என்னன்னா ஒண்ணு வந்து பாத்தீங்கன்னா வீட்டு வாடகை கொடுக்கணும். ஸோ இந்த வீட்டு வாடகை வந்து நார்மலா ஒரு மேல் ஃபீமேல் ஃபேமிலிக்கு வந்து 2,000 ரூபாயில விடக்கூடிய வீடை வந்து எங்களுக்கு வந்து 3,000 வாடகை சொல்லி விடுவாங்க. ஏன்னா எங்க திருநங்கைகளுக்கு வீடு கொடுக்கறதுக்கு நிறைய பேர் இந்த சொசைட்டில வந்து விருப்பப்படுறது இல்லை. அப்படி யாரோ ஒருத்தவங்க கொடுக்கறதா இருந்தா அவங்க டிமாண்ட் பண்ணுவாங்க, நீங்க 3,000 கொடுக்கணும் அப்படின்னு சொல்லி. ஸோ அந்த மாதிரி ஒரு மெடிக்கல் எக்ஸ்பென்சஸ், அதாவது எங்களோட ஃபெமினைசேஷன் ப்ராசஸ், அப்புறம் மெடிசின்ஸ், இதுகளுக்கெல்லாம் வந்து அதிக செலவுகள் வந்து ஆகுது. ஸோ இதனால வந்து சிங்கிள் பர்சன் இன்கம்ல வந்து நிறைய விஷயங்களை பூர்த்தி பண்ணுறதுங்கிறது வந்து ரொம்ப கஷ்டமான ஒரு சூழ்நிலை. ஸோ அந்த மாதிரி இருக்கையில எங்களுக்கு வந்து இன்கம்ங்கிறதும் கம்மி, அதுவும் இல்லாம எக்ஸ்பென்சஸ், அதாவது காஸ்ட் ஆஃப் லிவிங்ங்கிறது வந்து அதிகமா இருக்கு. ஸோ அந்த மாதிரி சூழ்நிலையில வித்தவுட் இன்கம் எங்களால எப்படி இருக்க முடியும் அப்படிங்கிறதான் பெரிய கொஸ்டின் மார்க்கு. அதனால எங்களுக்கு ப்ராப்பர், அதாவது எங்க சமுதாய மக்களுக்கு வந்து ப்ராப்பர் சேவிங்ஸோ பேங்க் பேலன்ஸோ பேக்ரவுண்ட் சப்போர்ட்டோ எதுவுமே கிடையாது. ஸோ அதனால அவங்க ஒவ்வொரு நாளும் தன்னோட வாழ்வை நடத்துறதுக்கு வந்து ரொம்ப கஷ்டப்பட்டு இருக்கிறாங்க. இந்த லாக்டவுன் காலத்துல எந்தவித வருமானமே இல்லாததுனால ஃபர்ஸ்ட் அவங்களுக்கு வந்து அவங்க சாப்பிட்றதுக்கு உண்டான அடிப்படை தேவைகளான அரிசி பருப்பு மளிகை ஜாமான்கள் அது வாங்குறதுக்கே அவங்களுக்கு ரொம்ப கஷ்டமான சூழ்நிலைக்கு தள்ளப்படுறாங்க. 2வது விஷயம் வீட்டு வாடகை கொடுக்கறது. இந்த மாதிரி வீட்டு வாடகை கொடுக்கறது, வருமானமே இல்லாத டயத்துல வீட்டு வாடகை எப்படி கொடுக்கறது? ஸோ அந்த பிரச்சனையும் அவங்களுக்கு நிறைய வருது. அது போக அடுத்தது பார்த்தோம்னா நம்மளுக்கு மெடிக்கல் சப்போர்ட் பார்த்தோம்னா நம்மளுக்கு வந்து நார்மலாவே டிரான்ஸ் பீப்புளுக்கு வந்து அந்த ஃபெமினைசேஷன், அந்த ஹார்மோன் ட்ரீட்மெண்ட் இதுங்களுக்கெல்லாம் வந்து அதிகப்படியான செலவு ஏற்படுது. அந்த செலவுகளை வந்து பேலன்ஸ் பண்ண முடியாத சூழ்நிலைக்கு தள்ளப்படுறாங்க. ஸோ அது ஒரு கவர்மெண்ட் ஹாஸ்பிட்டல்ஸ்லயும் அந்த அந்த ஃபெமினைசேஷனுக்கு உண்டான ட்ரீட்மெண்ட்டோ அந்த சப்போர்ட்டோ எதுவும் இருக்கிறது இல்ல. ஸோ அதனாலையும் கொஞ்சம் வந்து அதை வந்து பிரைவேட் கிளினிக்ல போய் நாங்கள் ஆக்சஸ் பண்ண வேண்டிய சூழ்நிலைக்கு தள்ளப்படுறதுனால ஸோ அதுலயும் வந்து அதுக்கு உண்டான எக்ஸ்பென்சஸ் ப்ராப்பரா பண்ண முடியாம ப்ராப்பர் மெடிக்கல் சப்போர்ட் கிடைக்காமையும் கஷ்டப்பட்டுட்டு இருக்கிறாங்க. அது போக பார்த்தோம்னா நிறைய இடங்கள்ல வந்து திருநங்கைகளுக்கு வந்து இந்த இப்ப வீட்டிலேயே இருக்கக்கூடிய சூழ்நிலைகளுக்கு வந்து தள்ளப்படுறோம். ஸோ வீட்டிலேயே இருக்கிறதுனால ஒண்ணு அவங்களுக்கு வந்து எந்த இன்கமும் கிடையாது. அவங்களோட வாழ்க்கையை நடத்துறதுக்கு தேவையான அடிப்படை தேவைகளை பூர்த்தி பண்ணிக்கிறதுக்கு உண்டான வருமானமும் இல்லாதனால அந்த தேவைகளை பூர்த்தி செய்ய முடியாதனால அவங்க மென்டலி பிசிக்கலி ரெண்டுலயுமே அவங்க வந்து பிரச்சனைக்கு ஃபேஸ் பண்ண வேண்டியதா இருக்குது. மென்டலி டிஸ்டர்பன்ஸ் ஆயிடுறாங்க. அது அப்புறம் பிசிக்கலி அவங்களுக்கு வந்து நிறைய பிரச்சனைகள் ஏற்பட வாய்ப்பு இருக்குது. ஸோ அந்த மாதிரி பிரச்சனைகள் எல்லாம் ஃபேஸ் பண்ணி தான் இன்னைக்கு நிலைமைக்கு வந்து திருநங்கை சமுதாய மக்கள் வந்து அந்த லாக்டவுன் காலத்தை வந்து ரொம்ப காலம் தள்ளிக்கிட்டு இருக்கிறாங்க. அது போக பார்த்தோம்னா வந்து கவர்மெண்ட் சைடுல இருந்து ஒரு சில சலுகைகள் கிடைக்குது. இப்போ எடுத்துக்காட்டா நம்ம சொல்லணும்னா இன்றைய முதலமைச்சர் வந்து திருநங்கைகளுக்கு வந்து 2000 ரூபாய் வீதம் வந்து கொடுக்கணும் அப்படின்னு சொல்லியிருக்கிறாங்க. அந்த 2000 ரூபாய் எதை பேஸ் பண்ணி கொடுக்கணும்னு சொல்லியிருக்கிறாங்கன்னா நலவாரிய அடையாள அட்டை, அதாவது 3ஆம் பாலின நலவாரிய அடையாள அட்டை யார் வைத்திருக்கிறாங்களோ அவங்களுக்கு வந்து அந்த 2000 கொடுக்கலாம்னு சொல்லியிருக்காங்க. ஆனா அந்த அடையாள அட்டை வந்து எல்லாருக்கிட்டையுமே இருக்கிறது இல்ல. ஒரு குறிப்பிட்ட திருநங்கைகள் வாங்கியிருக்கிறாங்க. சோ அந்த மாதிரி இல்லாத திருநங்கைகளுக்கு அது கிடைக்கிறதுக்கு வாய்ப்பு இல்லாம இருக்குது. சோ இந்த மாதிரி சூழ்நிலையில அந்த அடையாள அட்டைக்கு வந்து கவர்மெண்ட் அதிகாரிகள் அணுகுனாலோ இல்ல கவர்மெண்ட் ஆபீஸ்க்கு போனாலோ லாக்டவுனுங்கிறதுனால அந்த சர்வீசஸ் எங்களுக்கு கிடைக்கிறதுக்கு கஷ்டமா இருக்கு. எக்ஸாம்பிளா எடுத்துக்கிட்டோம்னா நிறைய எங்களுக்கு வந்து இந்த நலவாரி அட்டை வச்சு மூலியமா தான் பேஸ் பண்ணி தான் ஆதார் கார்டு சேஞ்ச் பண்றது, கெஜெட்ல நேம் சேஞ்ச் பண்றது, மத்த எல்லா வந்து கவர்மெண்ட்ல வந்து எந்த ஒரு சலுகைகளும் வந்து வாங்குறது, இது எல்லாமே அதை பேஸ் பண்ணி தான் போகும். ஸோ இந்த மாதிரி டயத்துல இப்போ கவர்மெண்ட் ஆஃபீஸஸ் எல்லாமே வந்து க்ளோஸ்ல இருக்குது. ஒரு சில இடங்கள்ல வந்து நாங்க போய் ஒரு சில ஆஃபீஸ்ல வந்து ஆதார் கார்டு எங்களுக்கு எடுக்கிறதுக்கு போனாலோ இல்ல இந்த கெஜெட்ல நேம் சேஞ்ச் பண்றதுக்கு போனாலோ இல்ல இந்த கார்டுங்க ஏதாவது ஐடி ப்ரூஃப்க்கு நாங்க போனாலோ ஸோ லாக்டவுன் டைம்மா நீங்க லாக்டவுன் முடிஞ்சோன்னு வாங்க, ஸோ அந்த மாதிரி பிரச்சனைகள் வந்துடுது. ஸோ அப்படின்னு சொல்லி அனுப்பிச்சு விட்டுறாங்க, லாக்டவுன் முடிஞ்சோன்னு வாங்கன்னு சொல்லிட்டு. ஸோ அந்த மாதிரி டயத்துல நாங்களுக்கு எந்த வித ப்ரூஃபுமே இல்லாம இந்த அரசு கொடுக்கக்கூடிய சலுகைகளை கூட பெற முடியாத சூழ்நிலைக்கு தள்ளப்படுறோம். ஸோ இந்த மாதிரி பிரச்சனை இருக்கிறதுனால ரொம்ப வந்து கஷ்டமான ஒரு சூழ்நிலைக்கு தள்ளப்படுறாங்க. அடுத்தபடியா நம்ம பார்த்துக்கிட்டோம்னா ஃபேமிலி சப்போர்ட்ஸ், அதாவது ஃபேமிலியில நிறைய திருநங்கைகளுக்கு வந்து ஃபேமிலி சப்போர்ட்ஸ்ங்கிறது வந்து கிடையாது. அந்த ஃபேமிலி சப்போர்ட் இல்லாததுனால நிறைய இடங்கள்ல வந்து நிறைய பிரச்சனைகளை ஃபேஸ் பண்ண வேண்டியதா இருக்குது. ஸோ இப்போ நார்மலா நீங்க ஃபேமிலி பீப்புள் இருக்கிறீங்கன்னா குழந்தைங்களுக்கு வந்து இப்போ ஒரு பேரண்ட்ஸ் இருக்கிறாங்க, அவங்க குழந்தைங்களை வந்து சப்போர்ட் பண்ணி பாத்துக்கிறாங்க. ஃபேமிலியில வந்து ஒருத்தவங்க கிட்ட கஷ்டமான சூழ்நிலைகள் இருந்தாலும் இன்னொருத்தவங்க வந்து அந்த கஷ்டமான சூழ்நிலைக்கு வந்து சப்போர்ட் பண்ணி அவங்களுக்கு வந்து இந்த வரக்கூடிய பிரச்சனைகளை கொஞ்சம் வந்து சால்வ் பண்ண முடியுது. ஆனா எங்க திருநங்கை மக்களுக்கு வந்து எந்த விதமான சப்போர்ட் கிடையாது. அதாவது ஃபேமிலி அக்செப்டன்ஸ் அப்படிங்கிறது இல்லாத ஒரு காரணத்தினால அவங்களுக்கு எந்த விதமான மாரல் சப்போர்ட்டும் எதுவுமே கிடைக்கிறது இல்லை. ஸோ இன்னைக்கு இருக்கிற காலகட்டத்துல இந்த மாதிரி இருக்கிற கஷ்டமான சூழ்நிலை வந்து நிறைய இடங்கள்ல நாங்க வந்து எங்கள்லயே, அதாவது திருநங்கை சமுதாயத்திலே இருக்கக்கூடிய சமூக ஆர்வலர்கள் நாங்க வந்து கவர்மெண்ட்டையும் சரி நிறைய சமூக ஆர்வலர்களையும் தொண்டு நிறுவனங்களையும் வந்து அணுகி அவங்க மூலியமா ஏதாவது எங்களோட அடிப்படை தேவைகளை பூர்த்தி செய்யும் வண்ணம் அரிசி பருப்பு இந்த மாதிரி மளிகை சாமான், அதாவது ட்ரை ரேஷன்ஸ் இந்த மாதிரி வாங்கி ப்ரொவிஷன்ஸ் வாங்கி நிறைய நாங்கள் திருநங்கை மக்களுக்கு வந்து ப்ரொவைட் பண்றோம். ஸோ அதன் மூலியமா தான் இன்னைக்கு நிலைமைக்கு வந்து எங்க லாக்டவுன்ல டயத்துல வந்து எங்க திருநங்கைகள் வந்து கொஞ்சத்துக்கு கொஞ்சம் தன்னோட வாழ்வாதாரத்தை வந்து நடத்தக்கூடிய ஒரு சூழ்நிலைக்கு வந்து இருக்குது. ஸோ இது அதாவது மெயின் என்ன ஒரு பிரச்சனைன்னா இந்த லாக்டவுன் காலத்துல எல்லாருமே கஷ்டப்பட்டுக்கிட்டு தான் இருக்கிறாங்க. ஆனா அதிகப்படியான கஷ்டம் வந்து இந்த டிரான்ஸ் பீப்புளுக்கு மட்டும்தான். ஏன்னா வந்து ஃபர்ஸ்ட் பிரச்சனை ஒண்ணு, அவங்களுக்கு ஜாப் ஆப்பர்ச்சுனிட்டி எங்கேயுமே கிடையாது. நிறைய இடங்கள்ல அவங்களுக்கு ஜாப் ஆப்பர்ச்சுனிட்டி இல்லை. ஸோ அந்த ஜாப் ஆப்பர்ச்சுனிட்டி இல்லாத ஒரு காரணத்தினால வந்து பேசிக்கா வரக்கூடிய இன்கம்க்கு வந்து எந்த ஒரு கேரண்டியும் இல்லை. கேரண்டியான ஒரு இன்கம்ங்கிறது இல்லை. ஸோ ரெண்டாவது இவங்களோட வாழ்வாதாரத்துக்கு பண்ணக்கூடிய அந்த கடை வசூல், செக்ஸ் ஒர்க் இது டோட்டலா வந்து க்ளோஸ் ஆனதுனால வேற எதுவுமே பண்ண முடியாம சுத்தமா பிளாக் ஆயிடுறாங்க. இந்த மாதிரி சுச்சுவேஷன் ஆகுது. அடுத்தபடியா பார்த்தோம்னா நம்ம வீட்லயே இருந்துட்டு இருக்கணும் இல்லையா? ஸோ வீட்லயே இருக்கிறதுனால ஒரு சில பேருக்கு வந்து மென்டலி டிஸ்டர்பன்ஸ் ஆகி அங்க நிறைய பிரச்சனைகள் ஏற்படுறதுக்கு வந்து வாய்ப்பா இருக்குது, வழிவகை ஆயிடுது. இப்போ ஒரு சில பேர் ஃபேமிலிலேயே இருக்கிறாங்க. ஃபேமிலிலேயே இருக்கக்கூடிய திருநங்கைகளுக்கும் திருநம்பிகளும் சரி, அவங்க வீட்லயே இருக்கிறதுனால வீட்ல உள்ளவங்களோட ப்ரெஷர் நிறைய அவங்களுக்கு மேல வருது. ஏன்னா 24 ஹவர்ஸ் அவங்க எல்லாமே ஒன்னாவே இருக்கிறதுனால அந்த ப்ராப்பரான ஒரு அக்செப்டன்ஸ் இல்லாதனால அவங்களுக்கு வந்து மென்டலி டார்ச்சர், செக்ஸுவல் அபியூஸ் அந்த மாதிரி ஃபேமிலிலேயே நடக்கிறதுக்கு வாய்ப்பு இருக்குது. ஸோ இந்த மாதிரி நிறைய பிரச்சனைகளை வந்து சந்திச்சுக்கிட்டு வந்துகிட்டு இருக்கிறாங்க திருநங்கை சமுதாய மக்கள். இதுக்காக அதாவது இந்த மாதிரி பிரச்சனைகள்ல வந்து சமாளிக்கக்கூடிய சூழ்நிலைகள் என்னன்னா முதல்ல வந்து கவர்மெண்ட்லயும் சரி பிரைவேட் செக்டர்லயும் சரி திருநங்கைகளுக்கு வந்து ஒரு வேலை வாய்ப்புல வந்து முன்னுரிமை கொடுக்கணும். ஏன்னா வந்து இன்னைக்கு நிலைமைக்கு வந்து சொசைட்டில வந்து ஒரு சில பேருக்கு வந்து நல்லா தெரியுது திருநங்கைகளையும் நல்லா படித்தவர்கள் இருக்கிறார்கள், வேலை பார்க்கக்கூடிய தகுதி உடையவர்கள் இருக்கிறார்கள்னு சொல்லிட்டு நிறைய பேருக்கு தெரியும். ஆனா எத்தனை இடங்கள்ல வந்து இது வரைக்கும் எத்தனை பிரைவேட் கம்பெனி இப்ப நம்ம சென்னையிலேயே எடுத்துக்கிட்டோம், தமிழ்நாட்டிலேயே எத்தனையோ பிரைவேட் கம்பெனிஸ் இருக்குது. ஆனா எத்தனை கம்பெனில வந்து திருநங்கைகளுக்கு வந்து ஒரு வாய்ப்பு கொடுத்துருக்காங்க, ரெக்ரூட் பண்ணியிருக்கிறாங்க. ஸோ அந்த மாதிரி இருக்கிற சூழ்நிலையில அந்த பிரைவேட் கம்பெனிஸ் வந்து திருநங்கைகளுக்கு வந்து வேலை வாய்ப்பு கொடுத்தா இந்த மாதிரி லாக்டவுன் லாக்டவுன் பீரியடா இருந்தா கூட அவங்க வந்து ப்ராப்பர் செக்யூர் இன்கம் அப்படிங்கிறது ஒன்று அவங்களுக்கு பேக்ரவுண்ட் சப்போர்ட் கொடுக்கும். ஸோ அதன் மூலியமா நிறைய விஷயங்களை வந்து அவங்க சாதிக்க முடியும். அது போக கவர்மெண்ட் செக்டர்லயும் வந்து இதுக்கு உண்டான ஸ்டெப் எடுத்து கவர்மெண்ட்ல வந்து வேலை வாய்ப்புகள் அதிகரிச்சு கொடுக்கணும். ஏன்னா வந்து இப்போ நிறைய பேர் சொல்லுவாங்க, ஏன் நீங்க நார்மலா எங்கேயோ ஒரு இடத்துல நம்ம வண்டியில போயிட்டு இருப்போம். ஸோ அங்க வந்து ஏதோ ஒரு திருநங்கை வந்து வசூலுக்கு நிக்கிறாங்கன்னா அப்போ நிறைய பேர் சொல்லுவாங்க, ஏன் நீங்க எல்லாம் வேலைக்கு போனா என்ன, நீ எதுக்காக வசூல் பண்றதுக்கு நிக்கிறீங்க அப்படின்னு சொல்லி கேட்பாங்க. ஆனா அந்த கேட்கிறவங்க யாராவது எங்கேயாவது ஒரு வேலை வாய்ப்பு கொடுக்கக்கூடிய இடத்துல இருக்கிறாங்கன்னா அவங்களே அந்த வேலை வாய்ப்பு திருநங்கைகளை கூப்பிட்டு கொடுக்கறது இல்லை. இதுதான் ஒரு பெரிய பிரச்சனையா. அதாவது நம்ம ஈஸியா சொல்லிடுறோம், ஆனா நம்ம வந்து அவங்களுக்கு வேலை வாய்ப்பு ஒரு இடத்துல கொடுக்கலாம் அப்படிங்கிற எண்ணங்கள் வந்து நிறைய பேருக்கு வர்றது இல்லை. அது போக நிறைய இடங்கள்ல வந்து அந்த சட்டங்கள் வந்து அதுக்கு தகுந்த மாதிரி மாற்றி அமைக்கப்படணும். ஏன்னா இப்போ ஒரு பிரைவேட் கம்பெனில வந்து ஒரு திருநங்கையோ டிரான்ஸ் பீப்புளை வந்து ரெக்ரூட் பண்றாங்கன்னா அங்க இருக்கிற பைலாஸ், அவங்களோட பைலாஸ் வந்து ஹெச்ஆர் பாலிசி அப்படின்னு சொல்லுவாங்க. ஸோ அந்த விஷயங்கள்லாம் வந்து கொஞ்சம் சேஞ்ச் பண்ணணும். ஸோ சேஞ்ச் பண்றது மூலியமா அங்க வந்து வேலை வாய்ப்புகள் நிறைய உருவாக்குறதுக்கு வாய்ப்புகள் இருக்கு. ஸோ அந்த மாதிரி ஒரு வேலை வாய்ப்புகள் கிடைக்கும் பட்சத்தில் திருநங்கை சமுதாயம் வந்து இன்னும் பெட்டரா அவங்க வந்து இது மாதிரி லாக்டவுன் வந்தா கூட இன்னும் அவங்க வந்து பெட்டரா வந்து அந்த ப்ராப்ளத்தை ஃபேஸ் பண்ணதுக்கு அவங்களுக்கு ஒரு சப்போர்ட் கிடைக்கும். ஸோ வேலை வாய்ப்பு தான் இப்போதைக்கு இருக்கிற பெரிய பிரச்சனையே. அது போக ஸ்கூல் காலேஜஸ்ல எல்லாம் பாத்தீங்கன்னா நிறைய திருநங்கைகளுக்கு வந்து டிஸ்கிரிமினேஷன் அந்த மாதிரி விஷயங்கள் நிறைய நடக்குது. இந்த லாக்டவுன் காலத்துல நம்மளுக்கு வந்து அந்த டிஸ்கிரிமினேஷன் அப்படிங்கிறது வந்து வெளி சைட்லயும் சரி, முக்கியமா ஃபேமிலிலயும் சரி, ஃபேமிலி இல்லாம சொசைட்டில நார்மலா இருக்கிற இடங்கள்லயும் சரி நிறைய இந்த மாதிரி டிஸ்கிரிமினேஷன் வந்து ஃபேஸ் பண்ண வேண்டியதா இருக்குது. இப்போ ஒரு மெடிக்கல் சப்போர்ட்காக, அதாவது மெடிக்கல் ட்ரீட்மெண்ட்காக ஒரு ஜிஹெச்கே நாங்க போறோம்னா அந்த இடத்துல வந்து திருநங்கைகளை பத்தின புரிதல் இல்லாத ஒரு நபர்கள் வேலை பார்க்கும் பட்சத்தில் அந்த இடத்துல ப்ராப்பரான ஒரு மெடிக்கல் சர்வீசஸ் ஆக்சஸ் பண்றதுக்கு கூட முடியாத ஒரு சூழ்நிலைக்கு வந்து தள்ளப்படுறோம். ஸோ இந்த மாதிரி நிறைய பிரச்சனை திருநங்கைகள் வந்து இன்னைக்கு நிலைமைக்கு இந்த லாக்டவுன் காலத்துல வந்து ஃபேஸ் பண்ணிட்டு இருக்கிறாங்க. ஸோ இதுக்கு மேலேயும் நிறைய விஷயங்கள் நம்ம சொல்லலாம். ஆனா வந்து எல்லாமே இந்த எல்லா பிரச்சனைகளுமே அவங்களுக்கு வந்து ஒரே ஒரு காரணத்துல தான் கிரியேட் ஆகுது. ஒன்னு ஃபேமிலி அக்செப்டன்ஸ், இன்னொன்னு சொசைட்டில வந்து ப்ராப்பர் சென்சிட்டைசேஷன் இருக்கணும், அவர் திருநங்கைகளுக்கு உண்டான அந்த சப்போர்ட் கிடைக்கணும். மூணாவது விஷயம் வந்து என்னன்னா அவங்களுக்கு வந்து சரியான வேலை வாய்ப்புகள்ல வந்து முன்னுரிமை வழங்கணும். ஸோ வேலை வாய்ப்புகள் கண்டிப்பா அவங்களுக்கு கிடைச்சிச்சுன்னா அவங்க வந்து அவங்களுக்கு வரக்கூடிய எல்லா பிரச்சனைகளையுமே அவங்க வந்து சமாளிக்கிறதுக்கு அவங்க ரெடி, அதுக்கு தகுந்த மாதிரி தயார்படுத்திக்குவாங்க. That's all.
Thank you, madam.
Yes, Lucky.
Thank you, madam. Yes. Are you able to see me, madam? Yes. Thank you, madam, for completing and sharing your experience within the limited period of time which is allotted to each resource person. Let me tell you that after listening to your talk, we felt that it's a time for us all to change the attitude towards the transgender, and we have to provide them with an identity so that they will be able to get all the opportunities and they were able to enjoy all the benefit which is being provided by the government under the various scheme. And after listening to you, it's really, it's touching us, and it's very painful to think that what are all the problems which are faced by the transgender community during the lockdown period of time. Thank you, madam. Thank you for sharing your experience with us.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Next, I invite Mr. Y. Franklin Jones, at Humanitarian and Emergency Affairs, World Vision India, Chennai. Sir is having 25 years of work experience with World Vision India, disaster management specialist with hands-on experience during emergency responses in Myanmar, Philippines, Nepal, and India. Besides disaster management, more than 10 years of experience in development projects in watershed management, agriculture, microfinance, HIV/AIDS, urban development, passionate for the capacity building of relief responders and grassroots level community groups, expert in emergency logistics and supply chain management. Sir has completed Master in Social Work, Diploma in Labor Law, and Resource Person for Help Logistics, Singapore, and expertise in designing the simulation for disaster response. I invite you, sir.
Hello, everyone.
Yes.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes, sir. You're audible,
Okay.
sir.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. I want to thank the organizers for inviting me to talk to all of you on the impact of COVID on women and girl children. And it's really interesting to know that this seminar is organized to talk about the gender implications of this pandemic, which is happening right now. So most of the things which I'm going to talk to you, it is from our experience since last year, as we are responding in 128 locations where we have our projects across India, and the lessons learned out of that, and the kind of interventions which we are doing to address the gender implications. So some of the impact of COVID on gender are the women's livelihood and the income security, and the increased domestic violence, the risk of child marriage or number of child marriages which we are able to see and hear, and increased workload for women, and access to sexual and reproductive health services, and on women's health and child trafficking. So the first thing, women's livelihood, income security, and as we did this study and also the other data, it suggests that between March to April 2020 alone, it is estimated that 17 million women in both the formal and informal sector were left jobless. And lesser time spent by women in their home business was to deprioritization of their own businesses within the household. So it took a lot of toll on women as it increased their burden. Whatever they were doing at their home, because of all this joblessness and lockdown and everything, it increased the workload for the women at their home itself. So enterprises faced a large drop in earnings, low sales, and low customer footfall, which directly or indirectly impacted the livelihoods and the income security for the families, and also the funds to be removed or laid off for the women in all the jobs where they were working. And during the pandemic, more than 72% women-led enterprises reported cash shortage than male-led 53% enterprises. So even preference in funding to the women-led enterprises, it got reduced. As other speakers were also talking about the violence against women and girls, especially in the rural setup and equally in the urban setup also, nearly every 5 household of the sample we have reported change in the behavior of spouse after lockdown. So this is from the rapid assessment of impact of COVID-19 study, which we did on life and livelihood of slum dwellers in Indian cities, along with National Institute of Urban Affairs and World Vision. They did this study. So, and 40% of total respondents of 463 have reported increased domestic violence since lockdown. And now, if you dig down deep into this one, why during this pandemic or during this lockdown, the number of cases have gone up? It's basically the direct impact on their livelihood, the stress which both men and women they go through, um, and also how it is impacting the children in the family. All that stress and everything adds up, and it somehow gets into the increased domestic violence. We were talking to one family in Lucknow, and the father, who seems to be a very sober man, but the wife had a different story to tell. And she was telling, I don't know what happened to this man. He was good, but all of a sudden, he has changed a lot. Every day there is violence at my home. And normally people would say that he drinks, and that's where um, uh, and they would be their wives and all. But this guy is not in habit of drinking, but still there is domestic violence. And when staff, they spoke to this man, and his story, he had to say, I cannot come into my home because of the helplessness which I have within me. I know my family is not eating properly. I know there is sickness in my family. Because I lost my job, because I am not in position to meet the needs of my families, my behavior has changed. And this thing my family members are not able to understand. So it's not just that one way. There are a lot of other things which adds up, and then the domestic violence cases increases. Among those who have reported change in spouse behavior, 53.6% reported increased squabble with their spouses, regulars, and significant reduction in household income in the main is the main reason behind the increased squabble in couples. So decrease in income, and whereas the need has not decreased. So that is one of the major challenge which the families they face. And end of the day, it all it comes to uh, the women who is suffering in the family. So around 31.2% of the respondent reported of being humiliated, threatened, and emotionally tortured. However, 25% have reported increased physical violence. So there are different kinds of uh, stress which is the families are going through, and in 25% of the families have reported in reported increase in the physical violence. Okay. Um, Child marriage, especially in the north, but of late we are also hearing that in southern states also, the number of child marriage incidents are also happening. India has the largest number of brides in the world, one third of the global total, and estimates suggest that each year at least 1.5 million girls under 18 got married in India, and one in every three child brides live in India. This is according to the UN report. So, Child Line India, a local charity, intervened in 5,333 such illegal marriages between March and May 2020. Just in few months, around 5,333, and we hear these kind of incidences from, especially from eastern and North Indian states, where the parents are really worried about the situation, the continuous lockdown, and their desperate situation to take care of the needs of the children at home. And that's where and the risk of child abuse which they see, which has of late increased. So they are marrying off their daughters as young as 13, 14 years. So unpaid care work has increased. If we look at the work distribution between man and women in the family, uh, this pandemic has definitely increased the workload for women, additional to what they were doing. And even before the pandemic, they were already overburdened with the workload, but of late in the pandemic, it has further increased their workload. So prior to the crisis, women on average did 3 times unpaid work, which is like domestic work, taking care of children and elderly in the family as men. With closures of school, offices asking employees to work remotely and social distancing measures in place, where most of the time everyone is at home, the workload for adolescent girl and women has increased. They have to do additional work because now people are at home, and the children are they're not going to Balwa school. So the all these things, most of them they're at home. This has increased the workload. Unpaid care work has increased for women. As schools closure continues and families remain home during COVID-19, women care has increased by almost 30%, and which is sometimes um, uh, not been it is not noticed so easily. But and this 30% is definitely a, a figure which everyone should look at, because the prior to this situation, women were already burdened, be it a rural setup or in a urban setup. In both the locations, the women they were overburdened with work, and now approximately 30% of their work is increased. So access to sexual and reproductive health services, this area not very much spoken or not very much this area not very much spoken or not very much identified. But as we did this survey, and there are very important aspects which has emerged, which needs attention from everyone, be it NGO, government, or as individuals. We need to give priority and attention to these needs of the women, which is not very often spoken about, or the women they don't prefer to speak, or even to an extent, men are also not that sensitive when it comes to the needs of the women. So the access to the menstrual hygiene supplies is has reduced drastically uh, for various reasons, lack of income, and the shops are closed down, and all those kind of things. Decision and influence on sanitation needs, access to toilet facilities and cleanliness, lack of sanitation facilities, increasing risk of vaginal infections, lack of privacy for safe place at home to change disposable pads or clothes during menstruation, lockdown most of the time, small houses or joint families where there's lack of space for all these things. So it is all creating more health risk for the women. Due to the restriction of movement, disposal of sanitary products has become more difficult for adolescent girls who menstruate. So some of these things, which is not very often spoken or not in normal conversation or discussion, is taking because of this, it is taking toll on women's health. um, and women's health at large. Myths, misconceptions, and stigma surrounding COVID 19, discouraging them from adopting healthy behaviors. And caregiving responsibilities of women extend beyond their homes, and women making 70% of the health workforce globally. So, if you look at this one, we hear very pathetic stories from our field locations. Be it around getting treatment for the COVID-19, or or the vaccine hesitancy around this one. Uh, different stories, and especially when it comes for women of getting treatment, especially women who are 40 plus and 45 plus, where, and in some of the villages they have said that no need to take women who are 45 plus, or no need for women to vaccinate women who are in childbearing um, age, no need for us to vaccinate them. So those kind of myths and misconceptions, stigma which is there, or someone has taken vaccine, or someone has become positive, there is stigma around that one. With COVID-19, there is stigma around that one. And number of death tolls which we see in rural area for women are more in number because of the stigma. They don't want to take their women to the hospital for treatment, or even for their neighbors to know that she is suffering. So, or they will only take when things have gone from their hand, the patient is very critical. So those kind of stigmatization, misconception, myths is taking toll on women's health also. um, Girl child dropout. The digital gender divide has worsened inequity in access to education. Um, with online classes and work from home becoming the norm, girls are at risk of getting left behind. The gender preference, if you have a mobile or at home, and if there are online classes, the first preference goes to the boy, or the girls would be said, okay, you can be the second, or there's no need for you to attend these classes, and those kind of things. And this digital gender divide is definitely a concern, not even not in just in rural, but also in urban. So another big thing which we have observed during this time is the migration and the reverse migration. As a result of lockdown, most of the infrastructure project and the urban small business establishment, all these are either closed down or they have downsized their labor workforce. And as a result of that, the reverse migration has happened. The labor force which had come from the rural area, the migrant labor, they have gone back. Or in some cases, if they have downsized it, the first thing what they have done is they have laid off all their women worker, the female worker from their list. So even there, we see that there is a discrimination. And when they go back, when the reverse migration happens, it's again a big pathetic situation for the migrant worker who has lost his job here, and he goes back there also, he is not welcome. In eastern states, we hear these stories a lot, these incidents a lot, that when the reverse migration happened, these migrant families, they have gone back. Either they have not allowed them to enter the village, and some of them, they stayed out of the village. Some of them, they were sick, they have died outside of the village because the villages did not allow their own fellow village members, or their family members, or the relatives to come inside the village. That is, one is with the fear that uh, they'll bring the infection. Second is, already the rural economy, or the opportunity for rural livelihood is already stressed out. The scope for them to get local livelihood options are limited. And when these migrant families, they go back to their native villages, there is stress on the availability of the livelihood options, and that creates friction and tension in the villages. We were interviewing few families in Bundelkhand region, place called Lalitpur, which is predominantly a drought-prone area. And when we were interacting with the women there, um, uh, the situation over there is, most of the young generation, they have left the agriculture because of the continued drought situation there. And they migrate to the cities in Rajasthan, where the marble work is there. Now the issue is, because of the lockdown and all this pandemic, those establishments are closed down, and they have come back. And here, because they don't have any touch with the agriculture work, or there is not so much of scope for the agriculture work. There's nothing. So it is creating a whole lot of tension in the communities over there, and whatever work or whatever income they want to share with the community which is already there, it is creating friction. Second thing, what we also notice there is because of the lockdown situation and they don't have the job opportunities, it is also taking toll on the nutritional aspect of the women or adolescent girl or the girl child in the family. With a little bit what they are able to get from the PDS system or any small income they have, the family is not able to feed well. And definitely, with all these gender discriminations which is there, the last to feed is the either the women or the adolescent girl or the girl child are fed less compared to the men. So these are some of the challenges which we see due to the lockdown and due to the pandemic and the migration and reverse migration. So, how are we addressing this gender equity in equality in World Vision's social inclusion approach? There are five things which we do. The first one, we have a men care model, because most of the time when we talk about gender equality, the focus is more on women, women, women. We try to see what we can do for women, but we tend to forget that men is also there, who is equally responsible or is contributing for all the challenges, or he is also a useful tool in bringing that equality and social inclusion. So this men care model deals with both men, focus on men on how to bring this gender equality. And second one is girl power, where we work with the women in empowering women and girl children. Um, and then the third one is social issues and cultural norms. There's an approach called channels of hope. And the channels of hope has got different subject, and one of the topics is gender. And there are specific tools which we use to address the social issues and cultural norms, uh, to make sure that there is gender equality and social inclusion. And sexual and reproductive health and rights of adolescent girl, very important aspect of our work, which we address through different approach which we have. And then secure livelihood through skill building. um, and during pandemic, as this has become a challenge for people to have livelihood options, we try to see what best can be done with the available resources, and with the scenario in place where there's lockdown, where the markets are closed. And we also try to see what are the uh, new skills which can be kind of with their available skills, what can be new skill enhancement for them, so that would help them to secure livelihoods for their families. So to achieve gender equality, we are suggesting the following: ensure women's equal representative in all disaster planning and decision making. This is one cautious step where we have been involving all the women in all our disaster planning and decision making, be it preparedness platforms, climate change adaptation, or emergency response planning. We involve women at all stages. Drive transformative changes for equality by addressing the care for addressing the care economy, paid and unpaid work, and economic empowerment, skill building, positive child and adolescent development, male engagement. As I said, gender is not just about women. Male also need to be engaged in all the approaches which we have. Strengthen system and structures, and inclusion of women in cash and voucher programming assistance. And this has been a very successful program which we started, or we did for the COVID pandemic response last year. in all the 28 locations where we reached families through our cash and voucher program assistance. And our recent study, it shows that the assistance which was given to the women, or where we enroll women as the beneficiaries for this program, the women managed it much better than compared to the men. Whether we gave them the cash transfers into their account, or we gave them commodity vouchers, women managed it better, because they knew what is the exact needs in the family compared to the men. And it was a very interesting study which we had. And this year, also we have already started doing this based on our lessons learned and our experience in the last pandemic. So this is what I wanted to share with all of you, and I would like to thank the organizers for this opportunity which is given to us in World Vision.
Thank you, sir, for the inspiring and informative presentation on the impact of COVID and lockdown on women and girl children from the rural background. What I feel that both the urban, there is no difference. Women in the urban area is also facing the problem during the lockdown, and the problem which is faced by the women and the girl children in the rural area is from the different angle. They are not able to come out of the house, which they consider it as a paradise for every person. The house is considered as a paradise, the four walls of the house. But now the house is considered as a hell for them, for those who are facing the problem of an abusive relationship. We used to say that we should be very careful enough from the outsider, but now we have to say that even you should be very much careful enough from the insider also. We should safeguard ourselves from the insider, say the same way as that of the outsider. And then we are talking about the equality, and then we are wondering whether equality is there. We are talking about the equality in the urban and the rural. Everything should be considered as a one. The woman and the male counterpart, everyone should be equal. But now everything is only in the paper. The lockdown, the COVID-19 pandemic time, it has become what the problem has been highlighted in such a massive manner that it's very difficult to control, and it is very difficult to manage everything. And thank you, sir, for recognizing that woman is able to manage the money matter in a better manner compared to that of a male counterpart. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for accepting our invitation. And the next speaker for the day is Dr. Vanilla, Assistant Professor, Department of English, Bharati Women's College, Autonomous, Chennai. Madam has been an educator for 27 years. Her research interests include African literature, Indian writing in English. Her research articles, short stories, and poems have been published in many anthologies and journals. A short story titled Born to Die appeared in Transnational e-Journal, May 2011, published by Flinders University in Australia. Madam's flash fiction, led forward by Dee, was one of the winning entries featuring in Inspired by Tagore International Publication 2011-2012, published by British Council and Sampath. She is also a member of a Chennai Poet Circle as well as Indian Poetry Circle. Madam, I invite you to address the August gathering. Over to you, Madam.
Thank you, ma'am. Warm greetings to everyone. I thank the Vice Chancellor of TNDA-LU and the organizing committee, especially Professor Sarvani, the program director, for giving me an opportunity to meet you all in this webinar. Let me share some of my views on the deadly disproportionate impact of lockdowns on women and girls. Let me share my PPT. Okay. Are you able to see me?
Yes, madam, we are able to see you.
Okay. Just a minute. Okay. Crisis and times of unrest have always been linked to incidents of violence against women and children. Pandemics are no exception to that, says the World Health Organization. In fact, pandemics act as magnifying lenses to indicate the spike in domestic violence against women and children. Now, at this point, you may have a doubt. Aren't men affected during the pandemic? Yes, I agree with you. I must acknowledge this point. There is a higher mortality rate among men. So, women's rights organizations have turned their attention to less obvious dangers faced by women. In the aftermath of, just a minute.
Madam, we are not able to see your slides.
You're not able to see my slides.
No, madam, we are not able to see.
Just a minute.
I think you started once again, madam. Again, you stop sharing and do it once again.
Oh, okay, let me join the meeting. I don't know.
Yes, madam, now we can.
But I am not able to share my PPT.
I think the organizing committee has done it for you.
Okay.
We will change the slide, madam, on your request.
Yeah, I can share it myself.
Okay, then Nirmal,
Okay.
then you can stop sharing it. Madam will do it from her side. Yes, madam, you can start sharing it now. I think madam is facing the technical problem. Arvani madam, whether Balaji sir is here?
Balaji sir will be coming only after 4:30. So, the backup, we have Nirmal can handle it.
Madam has left. Madam has left him. Madam has left. He will be joining again.
Okay.
We have
Then
to
I'll
wait
ask
for her.
Balaji sir.
Yeah. I request the participants, if any questions are there for the resource person, you can post it in the chat box. Once all the presentation is completed, we will be taking it from the chat box and we will be specifically addressing the resource person, the questions which is being posted by you in the chat box. Balaji sir is here. Balaji sir, are you able to hear me?
Madam, yes, I am ready now.
Yes.
Just a minute.
Can you start?
Yeah, just a minute.
Meanwhile, let me introduce you, sir.
You introduce.
Yes. Yes, yes.
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Wait, I'm not able to see, sir.
Start introducing, Lucky.
Yes, yes, I'll do it, Para. Because of the technical glitches, Madam is not able to share the PPT and Madam has left the virtual meet. Once the technical problem will be overcome, she will be joining us. So we will go to the next presenter here. Next presenter is none other than our own registrar, Professor Dr. V. Balaji. Is the registrar in charge and additionally holding the post of director in charge UG studies in the Tamil Nadu Dr. Ambedkar Law University, Chennai. Sir is having 18 years of teaching, research and administrative experience, produced 7 PhD scholars in law and interdisciplinary. Sir has participated in UK, USA, Malaysia International Conference, published several research articles in various legal journals, and nominated as a co-investigator in the South Asia project, Indo-US Civil Nuclear Agreement, funded by the Royal British Government, project director in charge for chair on consumer law and jurisprudence, funded by Ministry of Affairs, Government of India. Sir has participated in legal teaching and legal research at Cardiff University, UK, and awarded UGC prestigious research award for teachers to carry out 2 years research project. Sir has adorned many positions in our university as registrar in charge, syndicate member, controller of examination, dean of college development council, director for Department of Distance Education, zonal coordinator of NSS and YRC, and a loving sir for all the students and all the faculties of the university. Thank you, sir. I will invite you, sir. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Lucky Madam. Thanks a lot for giving a very big introduction. Hope that is not bigger than my speech. And let me, I think, at the outset, I thank Professor Sharvani Madam and the entire team for giving me this opportunity. And I myself should not thank to me as in another capacity. But however, it was in fact really good teamwork which has been going on. I think for yesterday and for today and for tomorrow. So today I have to present. In fact, my subject falls on yesterday actually, but due to some administrative reasons, they have been posted here. So don't feel that the topic today is something different and what I'm talking is something totally different. But somehow I can just adjust me. So my topic is today is regarding the 3-pillar model of sustainable development of the United Nations 2030 along the coastal governance with respect to the Disaster Management Act. So this is how I'm just trying to connect the dots on how this 2030 goal of United Nations will actually benefit India and what the India has to do with respect to that sustainable development goal of 2030. That is what my idea in this paper. So the Indian nature particularly is our marine beauty needs no introduction. So I commence this by 2030 agenda. Then I take the liberty of explaining the coastal areas, the indigenous people who are living in those areas, and will connect the dots about how these coastal areas, the people, the coastal economy are interrelated in disaster management plan. Now, in the coastal management, the road to sustainability, India is a country which is prone to natural disasters of all kinds, and we had our share of man-made disasters. Yet, each time disaster strikes, we are caught unprepared, which leads to a lot of unnecessary lives lost and unprecedented economic and social consequences. Thereby, we need to have a preparedness and preventive measures for such disasters. It will be possible if we have an in-depth plan to deal with the situation. This is an attempt to put forth the important aspects of the component of the coastal disaster management plan, which are divided into 3 aspects. One is pre-management disaster management, that is disaster preparedness. Number 2, disaster management plan, which comes in 2 phases, immediate and intermediate, and post-disaster management plan for reconstruction and rehabilitation. Now, the concept of risk management embodies prevention, preparedness, mitigation, response, relief and recovery, and rehabilitation. Now, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development of the UN Summit in 2015 were defined by the United Nations Secretary General as an agenda for people. Its key component, the Sustainable Development Goals, derived from intergovernmental process, which are considered by some of the most democratic and inclusive accomplishment in the history of the United Nations. The Sustainable Development Goals are thus part and parcel of the country's long-standing tradition and heritage. Indeed, the goals substantially reflect the development agenda of India, as the Prime Minister Narendra Modi himself noted in his speech at the United Nations Sustainable Development Summit. I quote, "Much of India's development agenda is mirrored in the Sustainable Development Goals. Our national plans are ambitious and purposeful. Sustainable development of 1/6 of humanity will be of great consequence to the world and our beautiful planet." I unquote. The pillars of sustainable development, where the sustainable development emphasizes the positive transformation trajectory anchored essentially on social, economic, and environmental factors. According to Taylor in 2016, the 3 main issues of sustainable development are economic growth, environmental protection, and social equality. Based on this, it can be argued that the concept of the sustainable development rests fundamentally on the 3 conceptual pillars. These pillars are economic sustainability, social sustainability, and environmental sustainability. A standalone sustainable development goal of 14 is dedicated to the oceans and their conservation and sustainable use. The oceans cover 2/3 of the planet, provide food for billions of people, which plays a key role in climate regulation and hosts a large portion of biological diversity and enable vital economic activities. Now, India, which is rich in its coastal heritage, where India is one of the 27 countries that will be worst affected by rising sea levels due to global warming, and the 60 million plus people living on the country's coast will bear the burden, according to the UN Development Program. India has about 6,740 kilometers of mangroves, including some of the largest mangrove forests in the world. Now, this mangrove coast along India coastline was decreased by 50% in some areas, largely because of human pressures, including alteration of flow of fresh water from upstream. Sea level rise is predicted to result in further reductions. The Bay of Bengal and the Arabian Sea are both predicted to be subject to extreme climate variability, with the frequency and the intensity of cyclones and extreme weather events projected to increase, particularly on the eastern coastline. More than 40% of the world's population, that is more than 2.8 billion people, live within this 100 kilometers of coast. Oceans are the world's largest single ecosystem, covering nearly 3/4 of the Earth's surface, thereby providing a massive arena for emerging complex and interconnected development issues such as climate change, livelihood, commerce, and security. According to the estimates with the Global Ocean Commission, ocean resources contribute 5% of the world's GDP, secure the jobs for 3 billion people, and sustain the livelihood of 350 million. So protecting the coastline is apparently protecting the livelihoods and economy attached to it. This aspect of governance can be called as blue economy. Small island developing states are among the most vulnerable nations to climate, the changing climate, and ocean and coastal degradation. The coastal casualties in India, which has to be protected, so the protecting the coastlines and coastal communities are not only for environmental sustainability, but also for economic sustainability. Disaster can be natural as well as man-made. The earthquake, cyclone, hailstorm, cloudburst, landslide, soil erosion, snow avalanche are the examples of natural disaster. While fire, epidemics, road, air, rail accidents, and leakage of chemicals, nuclear, and hazardous material into the ocean falls under the category of man-made disasters. India lost nearly 235 square kilometers of land to coastal erosion between the period of 1990 and 2016. While most of the existing policies in India address displacement from rapid onset disasters such as monsoons and cyclones, under disaster reduction and rehabilitation policies, displacement due to slow onset disasters such as coastal erosion has yet to find a place at policy level. The August 2018 floods in Kerala, for example, destroyed 280,000 houses, 140,000 hectares of standing crops, and about 70,000 kilometers of the road network. The total recovery needs of the state were estimated at 310 billion Indian rupees, according to the post-disaster needs assessment conducted by the UN agencies. Similarly, in April 2019, Cyclone Fani damaged 5 lakh houses and 6,700 hospital buildings and 1,800,000 odd lakh of agricultural land. Electricity infrastructure was also damaged, bringing the total losses to 500 billion INR. The studies in the damage assessment report indicate that it will take the coastal states about 5 to 10 years to rehabilitate, rebuild, and to recover. Scientists warn that the intensity and frequency of extreme weather events will only increase in the coming years. Given the highly climate sensitive nature of India's coastal infrastructure, the question is whether or not India's coastal infrastructure are equipped to withstand the impact of these climate change induced events. Do the coastal ecosystem have the capacity to cope and recover? Is a big question mark. The disaster management policies of India under LACNA, where the National Disaster Management Plan is consistent with the approaches promoted globally by the UN, in particular the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015-30. It is a non-binding agreement, which is the signatory nations will be attempt to comply with it on a voluntary basis. India will make all efforts to contribute, or it has to take all efforts to contribute to the realization of the goals targeted by the improving the entire disaster management cycle in India by following the recommendations of the Sendai Framework and by adopting the globally accepted best practices. The 4 priorities for action under the Sendai Framework are understanding disaster risk, strengthening disaster risk governance to manage disaster risk, investing in disaster risk reduction for resilience, enhancing disaster preparedness for effective response, and to build back better in recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. Now, the disaster management and its planning at various tiers must take into account the vulnerability of disaster affected area and the capacity of the authorities to deal with the situation. Using this approach, the High Power Committee on Disaster Management in its report in 2001 categorized the disaster situation into 3 levels, that is L1, L2 and L3. The period of normalcy, that is L0, should be utilized for disaster risk reduction. The level L1 talks about the level of disaster that can be managed with the capabilities and the resources at the district level. However, state authorities will remain in readiness to provide assistance if needed. Now, the L2 level signifies the disaster situations that require assistance and active mobilization of resources at the state level and deployment of state level agencies for disaster management. The central agencies must remain vigilant for immediate deployment if required by the state. The level 3 corresponds to a nearly catastrophic situation or a very large scale disaster that overwhelms the state and district authorities. The categorization of the situations of levels L0 to L3 finds no mention under the Disaster Management Act of 2005. Further, the Disaster Management Act does not have any provision for notifying any disaster as a national calamity or a national disaster. To my knowledge, please correct me if I'm wrong. The Disaster Management Act 2005 and the National Policy of 2009 marks the institutionalization of paradigm shift in disaster management in India from a relief-centric approach to one of proactive prevention, mitigation, and preparedness. The policy notes that while it is not possible to avoid natural hazards, adequate mitigation and disaster risk reduction measures can prevent the hazards becoming for major disasters. Disaster risk arises when hazards interact with physical, social, economic, and environmental vulnerabilities. The national policy suggests a multi-pronged approach for disaster risk reduction and mitigation consisting of the following parameters. Integrating risk reduction measures into all development projects, initiating mitigation projects in identified high priority areas through joint efforts of the central and state governments, encouraging and assisting state level mitigation projects, paying attention to indigenous knowledge on disaster and coping mechanisms, giving due weightage to the protection of heritage structures. This is Disaster Management Act 2005 mandated the creation of disaster response and mitigation funds at the national, state, and district levels, clearly reflecting prioritization of district response and mitigation over resilience building activities. There is no mainstream of dedicated disaster resilience fund, which is the concern in post-disaster management scenario. The government, both at the central and state, must formulate appropriate zoning regulations, building bylaws, and land use restrictions to conserve the coastal ecosystem and protect its critical infrastructure from future climate impacts. Madam Lucky Madam, if I am overshooting the time, please let me know.
2 more minutes, sir.
Okay. The National Disaster Response Force, NDRF, is known for its coastal rescue operations, but still, strengthening disaster risk governance is considered a cornerstone of the efforts to understand, reduce, and manage risk in the global practice, the United Nations Development Program. Now, this is to establish and strengthen the government coordination forums composed of relevant stakeholders at the national and local levels, such as national and local platforms for disaster risk reduction. Empowering the local authorities as appropriate through regulatory mechanism and financial mechanism to work and coordinate with civil society, communities, and indigenous people and migrants in disaster risk management at the local level. Work with the parliamentarians for disaster risk reduction by developing or amending the relevant legislation and setting budgetary allocations. Promote the development of quality standards such as certifications and award for disaster management risk with the participation of the private sector, civil society, professional association, scientific organizations, and the United Nations are the areas where the national disaster management is working. India, which is already having an excellent institutional framework for predicting disasters, where the Indian Space Research Organization, the National Remote Sensing Agency provide the satellite eyes capable of high resolution imaging of weather systems, while the India Meteorological Department carries out the real-time monitoring. The GSI maps out the high-risk areas and can effectively predict tsunamis. These institutional climate capabilities should be collectively mobilized to create a comprehensive approach that could guide the design, plan, and delivery on resilient infrastructure building. Access to the knowledge of traditional or local practices of resilience building and their dissemination, as well as encouraging adoption of diverse and locally appropriate techniques for vulnerable coastlines would be very crucial in this aspect. A well-planned collaboration between the government, academia, and the industry to get the best learning out of such event would benefit the state as well as the country at large. My concluding remarks: the national disaster management authorities and forums were active and dedicational in preventing the rehabilitation of disaster hit zones, especially on coastal areas. However, the long coastal history of coastline, the coastal communities, and the post-disaster impacts are of great concern today. Coastal environmental and coastal communities serve a great contribution to the coastal economy, the blue-green economy, and a key to coastal sustainable development. The perspective which I explained here is the goals and objectives behind UN and national initiative in greater level is not only of preserving nature, but the communities and their livelihoods which is depending on it. The indigenous tribe in the forest land, the fisherman community in the coastal line is of greater prominence. Protecting them along with the nature will be a complete solution for attaining the three pillars of economy, environmental, and social stability. India is on the way to achieve these milestones. The national disaster management plans, if get to work together with these coastal communities, the agenda which they seek for will be achieved wholly, and the lacuna which is to be filled is the government, local, and authorities should devise effective plan in the rehabilitation of these coastal communities are physical, psychological, and economical ways. This is how I conclude. And once again, I take this opportunity to thank all the organizers for giving me this opportunity. And I welcome if there's any questions in this regard. Thank you.
Thank
Over
you,
to you,
sir.
ma'am.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for an excellent presentation. Every year after 2015, we are hearing the word disaster. If it is a southwest monsoon, we can see that Kerala is in under the disaster. If it is a northeast monsoon, we can see that Tamil Nadu is in disaster. But we can see that because of the good satellite communication, we are able to mitigate the harmful effect of the disaster. And nowadays, what we are hearing is that because of the climate change and the global warming, sea is trespassing into the land area. So we have to take an action against the sea. Why the sea is encroaching upon the land area? We have to reduce the harmful effect of this. This is possible when each and every person will involve themselves to reduce the harmful effect of climate change and the global warming. Thank you, sir. Thank you for accepting our invitation, and thank you. I know that you are very busy with your administrative work, but still you are able to find the time and coming over here in a virtual mode and then for addressing the August gathering. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I once again invite Madam Dr. Vanilla, Associate Professor, Department of English, Bharati Women's College, Chennai. Madam, over to you.
Thank you. I apologize for the error encountered by my laptop. Okay. Now, let me revive my speech once again. Crisis and times of unrest have always been linked to incidents of violence against women. Pandemics are no exception to that, says the World Health Organization. In fact, pandemics act as magnifying lenses to indicate the spike in domestic violence against women. You may have a doubt here. Aren't men affected during the pandemic? Yes, I agree with you. Men are also affected. There is a higher mortality rate among men. So women's rights organizations have turned their attention to less obvious dangers faced by women. In the aftermath of COVID-19 outbreak declared as a pandemic by WHO on 21st March 2020, various measures such as surveillance and contact tracing, laboratory testing, prevention of community gatherings, hospital preparedness, infection prevention, and lockdown measures were adopted by governments across the globe. Our PM Modi announced a complete lockdown on 24th March 2020 because that was considered as the only measure to flatten the curve. India's lockdown plan was criticized strongly as an unplanned one. And an economist in the US criticized it as chaos is around the corner. Steve Hank, a professor of applied economics at Johns Hopkins University in the USA, stated that the alleged lockdown in India was spiraling into chaos. This coronavirus indeed induced lockdown brought a massive shock to the livelihoods of both men and women, resulting in the displacement of millions of migrants, job losses, poverty, and economy hitting the rock bottom level. There are many reports across the globe that point out the disproportionate load of the diverse impacts of the pandemic on women. Women are still the primary caregivers at home and frontline workers within the healthcare sector. As unpaid workers or less paid workers, they face financial crisis along with gender-based violence. Now, why do we say it is a disproportionate attack on women? You know, schools have been closed now. This has become a burden to women as primary caretakers. The combined pressure of work from home with increased childcare and homeschooling, elderly care, and domestic work fell on women, reported IWWAGE, a Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in India. And there is also physical and sexual violence. And not only that, lockdown has brought attention to domestic workers. They've lost their jobs for two reasons. Their employers have stopped them from their work, driven by the fear of contracting the virus, or their employers are not able to pay them. They also combat psychological pressures along with the financial crisis. And during lockdown, their movement is restricted. Women as sellers are not able to move due to lockdown restrictions, and this has weakened their economic condition. Now, we must learn lessons from previous pandemics to know the intensity of women's sufferings in disproportionate measures. During the spread of Ebola and Zika virus, women bore the brunt of lockdown as mothers, grandmothers, and daughters because they had to tend to the sick and dying relatives. So, the Ebola crisis in West Africa that had happened between 2014 and 2016 give us the data on sexual and gender-based violence, unintended pregnancies, loss of employment, and other socio-cultural abuses. Here, I would like to emphasize on the term socio-cultural norms because women's activities are restricted by these cultural norms, which pave the way for the oppression of women. The Lancet, a medical journal, gives an account of the kinds of impact. They say school closures are likely to have a differential impact on women. And it also reports about higher maternal mortality. See, in the beginning of my speech, I said there was a higher rate of mortality among men. But the Lancet, now here it reports there is a higher maternal mortality too. And many girls did not return to school once they reopened. And not only that, when during quarantines or lockdowns, women are burdened with more household work. And what are the reasons for the sufferings of women during the past pandemic? As per the report of the Lancet, women did not have autonomy over their sexual and reproductive lives. And they add one more reason: access to healthcare and access to healthcare was inadequate, and financial resources were insufficient for women to travel to hospitals for checkups for their children and for themselves. Now, we find the emergence of the similar pattern, the same pattern during this pandemic too. Now, let us know what had happened during lockdown in Tamil Nadu. The Hindu reports that 81% of rural families in Tamil Nadu suffered domestic violence during lockdown. And Pudukkottai stood on top of it in domestic violence. Kanchipuram comes second. You know what was the reason for the quarrel between the husband and wife? It was merely sharing of household work. And apart from this, 6,150 complaints were received from women and mostly housewives. And the last one is, say, of the total 13,447 complaints received during the lockdown, 13,372 cases were settled amicably. And the Hindustan Times reports about 36 Jharkhand tribal women migrant workers in Tamil Nadu. They say these women used to work in textile firms in Tamil Nadu's Tirupur, but now they have lost their jobs due to the COVID situation, and they are stranded here. There is yet another newspaper report on the existence of domestic violence. A suppressed woman from a village in Kanyakumari shared in a muffled voice to the interviewers about the violence at her own home. She attributed it to the financial struggle which aggravated during the pandemic as her husband had lost his job. There is another shocking news in the Hindu about child marriages during the lockdown. This had happened in the district of Tiruvannamalai. It was reported that 2 child marriages had taken place. However, the police department declares that there is a decrease in the incidence of child abuses and kidnapping. But child rights activists do not agree with them. According to them, child abuses must be happening somewhere, and those children may not have access to complain about it. Lockdowns have largely affected the informal sector, where women predominate. Women work as domestic workers, casual laborers, street vendors, beauticians, and hairdressers. Some are owners selling flowers, fruits, and fish, and some are entrepreneurs running salons and small scale businesses. But heavy interest loans, unpaid work, and low income have worsened their economic condition, and this makes their position very weak at home and prevents them from participating in any decision making plans. Lockdown is a curse to pregnant women as their regular checkups are at threat due to COVID-19 pandemic. If this aspect is not checked up, maternal morbidity and mortality are likely to go higher, says Dr. Usha Sriram in The Hindu. She also shares a concern on the state of school-going girls. Schools are being closed now. We do not know how many girls would return to schools if once schools had reopened in remote villages. This is what had happened in Africa after the pandemic of Ebola and the Zika epidemics. So, in this situation, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres recommends 3 cross-cutting priorities to ensure women's safety during this pandemic. He says, women's representation in all decision-making plans has to be ensured. We must keep on talking about care economy, paid and unpaid labor, so that a transformation for change, a transformative change for equality happens. And thirdly, he says, target women and girls in all efforts to address the socio-economic impact of COVID-19. All feminist theories often focus on analyzing gender inequality. Some of the oft repeated themes in feminist theory are discrimination, oppression, patriarchy, stereotyping, and sexual objectification. Now, the present pandemic has created another new theme called shadow pandemic. It's a term used by UN Women to describe the growing rates of violence against women and girls amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Our attention to this particular topic would further expand the feminist theoretical realm. Responding to the warning issued by the UN on shadow pandemic, the police in Tamil Nadu ensures safety of women during lockdown. Now, what should be the preventive measures to be adopted during lockdown? UN Women, a separate wing, recommends some measures to be adopted by governments. They say the needs of female nurses and doctors should be ensured. Hotlines and all essential services should be made available for all victims of domestic abuse. And health insurance benefits should be ensured for those most in need. And whether at the local, municipal, or national level, voices of women should be brought together into decision making, and this will lead to better outcomes. And lastly, unstereotype the gender roles. So, what is unstereotyping? What does it refer to? See, all household works and care work should be equally shared between the husband and the wife. But and this is quite equal for both. So we must stop marginalizing women in the public sphere, and we must stop exploiting women's resources in paid and unpaid labor. We must stop marginalizing violence as a private rather than public legal issue. And at last, you may say men also undergo domestic violence, but we should see the context and severity of violence by men against women. Women are really vulnerable. The intensity of fear, physical and mental health of women make domestic violence against women a much larger problem. Statistical reports confirm that 1 in 4 women are victims of domestic abuse in their lifetime, and 2 women a week are killed by their partners. Now, at this juncture, we must react seriously to this everyday reality. With this, I end my lecture. Thank you.
Thank you, madam, for the excellent presentation and using the terminology of disproportionate. Both men and women are suffering, but the intensity of suffering against a woman are more compared to that of a man. And then using of the terminology of a shadow pandemic by the UN, now it's become very clear that during the lockdown, during the pandemic time, you can see that the violence against the woman and the girls are increasing day by day. How come we can overcome all this problem? We know that we have a law, Domestic Violence Act is also there, but still the woman, what they will feel that it is not good to reveal what is happening inside the 4 walls of the house to be shared to the others, to go and file a case against the one's own better half and say that that person has done the violence against me. Now we can see that the women to the maximum they are suffering. Only when it comes to the what you call the tolerance level where she cannot able to tolerate, then only she will raise the voice and she will say that I'm being tortured, I'm being ill-treated within the 4 walls of my home itself. Thank you, madam. Thank you for highlighting what is happening in the real world. I don't think so this is only related to the pandemic. This is happening in the even before the pandemic also, but the intensity of the problem against the woman has increased during the pandemic period of time. Thank you, madam. Thank you once again.
Welcome. Thank you.
Sarvani, madam.
Yeah, we are waiting for sir to come within 5 coming. So in the meantime, if any questions
Any questions are there?
Like
Participants, kindly post it in the chat box. Or anything you wanted to share it also, kindly post it in the chat box. All the resource persons are available with us in the virtual mode. Thank you, Ravindran.
Can I ask a question?
Anyone?
Any question?
Anyone?
Okay, can I ask a question? No, if no questions are there?
Yes, madam, you can.
To
whom?
Satyashri, madam.
Satyashri. Madam Satyashri is there? No. I think madam has left.
Dr. Ragita is there.
Dr. Ragita is there. Number. He has joined with the number. No. Participants, kindly post the question in the chat box. We will send the question to the concerned resource person via email, and we will try to get the answer from them. Many of them, because of the personal reason, they would have left the virtual meet. They will be replying to the last speaker, Vanilla only.
Madam Satyashri is joining now.
Yes.
The question for her.
Let's she join. Let's she join. Balaji sir is also there. Vanilla madam is also available.
Okay. Somebody says that the PPTs are needed. I think one of our students is asking for the PPTs prepared by the experts who spoke. I think not all experts will be willing to share their PPTs because it is their papers, their point of view, and they have collected it. Anyhow, we'll request. I think sir has joined. Joined. So welcome, sir. Welcome, sir. Lucky, take over, Lucky.
Yes, madam. Welcome you, sir.
Yes.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure joining this meeting.
Sir, let me have a formal introduction about you, sir. We are honored with the presence of Dr. T.K. Vinod Kumar, IPS Additional Director General of Police, Intelligence Department, Kerala. Sir belongs to the 1992 IPS officers batch. Sir has also served as the Deputy Director, Joint Director of the Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel Police Academy from 2010 to 2012 and 2012 to 2014 respectively, where the IPS officers in India are trained made as officers. Sir also held various crucial positions in the Kerala Police during his spanning career. He received his PhD from Indiana University, Bloomington, where Sir also served as an assistant professor in the Department of Criminal Justice. Sir area of research are policing, public disorders and state response, ethnic conflicts, counterterrorism and quantitative techniques. Sir has published in various academic journals. Sir has published even a book on public events and police response, Understanding the Public Order Policy in Democratic India, was published in 2013 by Oxford University Press. Over to you, sir. Thank you, sir, for accepting our invitation. We know that it is a busy schedule for you. In spite of that, you have joined us. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your introduction. Can you kindly put up my presentation? I had sent by email my presentation. Can it be shared on the screen, please?
Yes, sir. We will do it, sir.
Okay. I don't know whether I can advance the presentation from my end, or only you can do it from that end.
Only the person who is sharing the PPT can do it, sir.
Okay,
Not
okay.
from you.
So I'll keep telling you to go
We will do
forward.
it, sir. We will do it, sir.
Yeah, so thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak to all of you. It's a great pleasure. I think I only got 10 minutes to speak, and I'm already 10 minutes late. I apologize for being late for this presentation. The idea of sharing this PowerPoint is to give a structure to my presentation, and I'm going to talk about how the police play a pretty important role in the spread of this disease throughout this country and in most of the states. And I'll be using the experience we have in the state of Kerala to demonstrate the role that the police plays. So next slide, please. So I know Kerala has the negative distinction of being the first state to get COVID-19 in this country. When we got reported the first case on January 30th, 2020. And from 7th March onward, there was till 7th March there was no reporting, but after 7th March there was renewed reporting of this case, and we have gone through two distinct waves of the COVID pandemic in this state, along with the rest of the country, and we have a lot of experience across different departments on how this disease has come across and how it has caused widespread devastation in the communities and among different age groups, how some states have been able to deal with it with more efficiently compared to other states, and how we can learn from each other's experience. So if I look at, I just gave you a small, in this present slide, I've indicated how the COVID-19 disease spread in the state of Kerala in the first 90 days of its spread. But this characteristic keeps changing. But one thing we can learn from it is that people coming into the state bring the disease. So in the earlier phase, around 67% of the cases reported were people coming into the state either from abroad or from other states. After that, primary contacts within the state, that is giving from abroad gives it to B and B gives it to C. That is within the state contact itself. So around 25% was through primary contacts, and secondary contacts amounted for 5% of the spread of the disease. And of course, 2% of the cases were untraced. In the early period of this disease, spread of the disease, contact tracing was practical and was done quite energetically by different departments, especially the health department, with help from other departments in the government. But during the second pandemic, the numbers are so large that the success of contact tracing was less efficient and less successful. Now, from our experience of the last 1.5 years, we could broadly classify the response to the disease, to the pandemic in two ways. One is medical treatment, and the other is the non-medical response in society. Unlike most other diseases, where the primary response is through the medical treatment. For example, if you have a disease like tuberculosis or flu, the primary part is treatment, and it is dealt with by the health department alone. Now, unlike that, surprisingly, COVID-19 had this unique distinction of having a major role for non-medical response, of which police department has played a very important role. Now, this is what I'll be talking about the non-medical response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide, please. Go on to the next slide. Yeah. So when I talk about non-medical response, it will be the major, mainly three parts in it: quarantine, enforcement, that is enforcing that people who are got the disease or who have come in contact with people who have got the disease, that is persons who have contacted a person having the disease but have not shown symptoms, are quarantined properly, either in institutional quarantine or home quarantine, and enforcing that the quarantine is done so that irresponsible behavior does not lead to rampant spread of the disease across the society. The second step that I think you skipped one, yeah. The second the second step, of course, used is social distancing, which the police primarily enforced it in society by ensuring that in the public place, people maintain the 6 feet distance with each other and they do not come too close to each other. That shopping areas and banks and schools and all are done. If at all they are functioning, they should function with people maintaining an appropriate distance so that the spread of the disease is not done. And third, of course, the most severe response to it is lockdown, in which society entirely is closed down, partially or sometimes entirely is locked down. Public transport is stopped, offices are closed. There is regulation on people going out into the public space, either with time or completely banning people coming out into the public space. In these three tasks of non-medical response, the police had a significant role to play. And for us at this generation, or for the people who are, between the age of 10 to 70, we have not seen the police play a role like this in society. A police role has largely been for crime investigation and public order management. But for the first time, they had to play a role for preventing of spread of the disease. So how did this police adapt to this patently non-police task is a story that has to be understood and told. Some states and some countries have done it very well. For example, it is countries like South Korea, Singapore, Taiwan. They have enforced, they have used the police quite effectively. And in our own country, Kerala is one state which has used the police to a large extent to ensure that the non-medical response is of a high quality and the spread of the disease could be controlled. And this is not, we are not talking about any anecdotal account, but what we are talking about is based on empirical data and how it is repeatedly used. Even the second pandemic which is going on, and I was in a meeting just 5 minutes ago reviewing what is happening across the state with different departments, with the political leadership reviewing the thing. And I could see that there was a lot of confidence in the government about the task of this non-medical response and the role that police plays. And you would see many chief ministers and ministers and even central ministers praising the task played by the role by the police and the importance of the role played by the police in controlling the spread of the disease. Now, in this presentation, I'll be talking about the role of the police and placing it in the wider context of the role of different institutions in society itself. But before I go into this, I must tell you that this is not the first time that humanity has faced a pandemic. We have faced pandemics in our own country earlier, but we have a very short memory and we don't keep too many records and we forget what has happened maybe 50 or 60 years ago. So let's just go to the next slide, please. India's Epidemic Disease Act, the EDA 1897, was a colonial era law, and this law was not reformed till the coming of the pandemic, of the COVID pandemic. So this 1897 Act itself was enacted primarily due to the spread of the bubonic plague in Bombay, and all that we see today. The spread of the plague in Bombay, in West Asia, in European countries, and in northern India, the response was inside the boundaries of the colonial British India was through the Epidemic Act of 1897. And if you read the act, which is available on the net, it's a fantastic act. It's very similar to the present act, and the present acts that the Epidemic Disease Act, which Kerala has enacted and many other states have enacted during the last 1 year, is a takeoff or it builds on the Epidemic Disease Act. And the Epidemic Disease Act itself had provisions to inspect persons, segregate infected persons, that's quarantine, inspect ships and vessels leaving or arriving at port, that is border management. All these provisions were there. And even during those times, police played a very important role. Even if you search on the net, you'll see certain accounts of that, of how police officers played a frontline role, and how the district administrator, district SPs, and the IGs of those period had awarded rewards to some of the police personnel who had done outstanding work in preventing the spread of the disease. So the role of police in pandemic control is not a new one; it's an old one. And in our own country, we had an excellent Act of 1897 and experience in doing that. Even in Europe and America, the Spanish flu, a lot of role was played by local government agencies to control the spread of the police. Of course, uniformed police played a minor role, but city corporations, city hall and municipalities played a major role in the spread of the disease through exactly the similar measures we have adopted in India. Now, in the modern era, after the COVID-19 pandemic, what is the legal structure that was there for us to fight the COVID? And this legal structure was cobbled pretty quickly with the amendment of the Epidemic Disease Act. The Kerala Epidemic Disease Act is of 2021, and it was first enacted in 2021 March itself as an ordinance, and then enacted when the Assembly met. And then, of course, the Disaster Management Act of 2005, the Indian Penal Code, and the Kerala Police Act, or the legal structure. As you know, any act, any executive action by the police needs legal backing. And these, the laws that you see here, that is Disaster Management Act, Kerala Epidemic Disease Act, Indian Penal Code, and Kerala Police Act, provided the backbone for the legal response, for the authority that the police exercise in controlling the disease. Next slide, please. So, I will not go line by line on the Kerala Epidemic Disease Ordinance, or KEDO, which was later enacted as an act. As I told you, 27 March 2020, we got the ordinance done with very quick response by the government, which understood the necessity for a new law, and how it would play an important role, and then getting the ordinance done, and later on getting the act legislated. Now, as you can see, there is, it can take measures to prohibit transmission of the disease, inspect persons, seal borders, restrict public and private transport, restrict congregation in public places and religious congregations, restrict government and private offices, prohibit and restrict functioning of shops, commercial establishments. These are very, I won't use the word draconian, but really severe measures that powers that the police have, and also the executive magistrates have in controlling this disease. The enactment of this ordinance and the later legislation really empowered the police to act, and this underlines the importance of the police, the empowerment of the police to do this positive work in the role it has played over the last 1.5 years. And of course, the existing Section 269 of the Indian Penal Code, which incriminates negligent acts which leads to the spread of dangerous disease, and the Kerala Police Act Section 118E, which incriminates acts that cause danger to public or endangers public safety, were also used by the police when they enforce the law in the public space. The Disaster Management Act, which many of you would be familiar with, is a broader act which gives great powers to the central government, the state government, and the district administration. And if some of you who are studying this pandemic closely, you would notice that most of the orders issued by the Union Home Secretary is on the basis of the recommendation of the National Disaster Management Committee, the NDMC, and National Disaster Management Committee. Most of the actions done by the state is under the authorities vested with the State Disaster Management Authority, SDMA. So it's called the NDMA, SDMA, and the DDA. The National Disaster Management Agency, the State Disaster Management Agency, and the District Disaster Management Agency. So these, the state level, the chief secretary and the disaster management agency meet regularly and review the situations and change, make minor changes or make fine tune the response of the different departments. So the role of and the importance of the Disaster Management Act in the response to pandemic itself is an article or a book or a story, and it should be taught in the universities. How much an act which was largely is generally used for floods and earthquakes was used in the case of this pandemic. Next slide, please. Now, as I told you, the state response is basically on three levels: the central government response, the state government response, and the district administration, the local self-government. All four play a very important role in their response. The central government, with the NDMA under Section 621 of the Disaster Management Act, is empowered in issuing orders which has to be carried out across the state. It issued the national lockdown early in 2020, and is now providing the disaster, leadership of providing vaccination across the nation. The SDMA, headed by the chief minister and the chief secretary and senior secretaries and senior officers of the police and other departments, play an important role in the state. And the DDMA with the police, health, district collector and others play a role in the district administration. But we should not forget that panchayats, municipalities also play a very important role, because the people are at the field level, at the ground level, and the field level agencies, the fourth tier of the government, that's of the central, state, district, the panchayat level, the local self-government institutions play a very vital role in addressing issues of this magnitude. So we will briefly talk about it in the coming slides. Next slide, please. So in the state response, other than the fact that the state government, the district administration and the local self-government play a role, and in the district and the state level, the police play an important role. There is a structure in the response: the political leadership, the civil administration, the police. These three form very important parts of the response. The political leadership is required because without the leadership of the ministers and the chief minister, who are answerable to the people and who understand the issues beyond laws, rules, and regulations, and the people's requirement, which brings in the political component into the response. The civil administration, covering health, local self-government, industries, education, etc., which brings in another facet, and the police department, which is large footprint across the state, large force of people at every level of society, at the district, state, village, and the taluk, and at the community level, also play a great role in the response. So these three, the political leadership, civil administration, the police, plan for addressing the control of the disease, enforce lockdowns, increase state health capacity, deal with the poor, sufferings of the poor due to unemployment caused by the lockdown, deal with issues of hunger and poverty caused by in the lowest sections of society, and try to revive daily wage workers, people who are below poverty line, to sustain through these difficult times. Next slide, please. Next slide, please.
Next slide, ma.
Could you please go to the next slide?
Nirmal sir, next slide.
Sir, there was a small hitch, current electricity connection.
Okay.
Another faculty is doing. Just 1 minute. Another faculty is doing. Deepa Lakshmi will come online.
Okay,
Just
I
1 minute.
completed the
Please
presentation. I got a hard copy here with me. So
yeah.
the next slide, what I have is that regarding the police work. What is the role of the police in this? Primarily, you can divide into two groups. One is to control the spread of the disease, which is the non-medical response, controlling the spread of the disease. And the second aspect is to assist the vulnerable sections of society. Now, what is the rationale of the role of the police? Number one, because the laws, whether it is Kerala epidemic KEDA, epidemic Act, which what is Epidemic Disease Act of 2021, or whether it is the Kerala Police Act, or whether it is the IPC, or whether it is the Disaster Management Act, the police are empowered to under different sections of the law. So there is a rationale for police to have a role in it. The other thing is that the health workers, if you see the structure of the health department, they are basically localized in the hospitals, in the primary health centers, the taluk hospitals, and the general and medical colleges. They are not spread across the community. It is not a mobile department like the police, like the state police department. So their penetration into the community is not to that extent of departments like the police or the local self-government. So when in the case of the pandemic, there is a necessity for service delivery at the doorstep, which sometimes the police department is not, with the health department is not able to do. Of course, now with the ASHA workers, there is a degree of outreach that the health department does, but they are overloaded in dealing with patients in the hospital itself. So this has necessitated other departments like the local self-government and police to reach out into the community and do so. There you can see a role for the police, for enforcing the laws as well as assisting people in the community. Next slide, please. The third issue is that the training that the police officers get in dealing with dangerous environment. Unlike many civil departments, police are already trained in dealing with dangerous environment. In the training phase, police constables up to the senior most ranks know how to deal take precautions to protect themselves, whether it's from bullets or whether it is from fire or whether it's from floods, because there's a lot of disaster management component in the training. And when the pandemic came, police officers quickly adapted themselves to the new dangers that were there, that are there in the present public space. The fourth aspect is community police relations. Many police departments already had community outreach programs, which help them to reach out to the community very quickly. So what is with these capacities, police basically enforce lockdown, enforce social distancing, enforce quarantine, available at airports, railway stations, road checkpoints to prevent people who have the disease, crossing across district borders, crossing across state borders, helping the health people to do medical, cursory or preliminary medical check to ensure that the disease does not spread across different points, because it's a very contagious disease. And of course, community outreach to help people who are going hungry due to lockdown, people helping older population, going to, orphanages, going to old age homes, going to mental institutions with mentally challenged people, going to lower economics, section colonies such as tribal areas, SC/ST colonies, low income group colonies, and reaching out to ensure that there is social distancing there and helping people to do this. This task is done both by the local self-government as well as the police, and sometimes by the ASHA workers. Next slide, please. These are some photographs just to give you a picture of how things are done by the police, because I've been giving you a background of all that is being done. You can see in this photograph, people going to low income areas, transport areas, homeless people or people who are wandering, who do not have a home and are in the streets in the night. Next slide, please. I'm just showing some more photographs for you. Next slide, please. So you can see how they are, getting help from the church in the local communities, how they are distributing vegetables to the needy, how they are stopping young people who have the propensity to go outside, who don't want to stay indoors for too long a period. Next slide, please. Next slide. So old age, people who are isolated, even police could even give medicines, which are not available in one district, because we have the facilities to vehicles with us. We obtain medicines from one district and deliver it to the people who require it. People were even there people are living together. They were even given sensitization. As you can see, tourists coming from abroad being advised on how what should be the precaution they should take when they land up in a particular area. Next slide, please. Next slide. So I will not repeat this. These are the part of the non-medical response of quarantine, social distancing, lockdown. Next slide. Next slide. Go on. Next slide. Click it. So if these are the you can keep clicking it so that all the graphs can come up. So you can see in this slide from 31-2020, the spread of the disease in Kerala was pretty low in the early part. Kindly click again. Next slide. Next slide. So you can see the disease picking up in the state, but controlled throughout the 2020s. Did not grow to a very large amount. Generally up to 7,000, the maximum of 7,000 to 8,000 positives a day. Next slide. And this was the first first wave, and the second wave in the early part of 2021. We continue. Next slide, please. Next slide. Though we controlled it to some extent, the second wave that hit our country was quite a bit here, and the positives rose up to 41,000, 42,000, presenting a new challenge, and new methods were used by the police to respond to it. Next slide. So one of the innovations that was brought about in the state was the triple lock mechanism, in which the first lock was closing the district borders, restricting movement across districts and across states. The second lock was put in localities where the high positives were seen, were known as hotspots, and these hotspots are demarcated as containment zones. So state borders, district borders, and then the containment zones. And the third lock was inside the community. Wherever quarantine was there, they were mapped using digital, mobile phone, and ensured that people who are under quarantine or had come in touch with people who had confirmed positive test were not allowed to come out. So it is a pretty tight system of breaking down the problem into multiple parts and ensuring that there's a complete lockdown. This is a very effective method that has been tried out in Kasaragod district, and I think the university got to know of it because I wrote an article on this triple lock mechanism, and I used the time series analysis to compare district with triple lock and without triple lock, and how efficient this was to ensure a steep dip in positivity rate, because it controlled the movement of people quite effectively. This triple lock, the advantage is that less number of policemen have to be used, and less enforcement has to be done, because the enforcement is done in a very scientific method. Compared to just posting policemen on the street, it's a waste of manpower and waste of efforts, because just posting without a plan would result in people bypassing the system. Next slide, please. So these are just a simple correlation that I've shown, which show that arrest conducted and vehicles seized in the public space resulted in reducing of the statistically significant reduction in the total infection by contact on the first day. 2 days lag, 3 days lag, 4 days lag. You can see that it has an impact on, if you do a lockdown today, within 3 days, you'll have a significant impact on the spread of the disease. Just a statistical, minimal correlation. Of course, if you read my paper, it shows how mathematical modeling can show that it really has a significant impact, and that we can see it in our response to the second wave. Next slide, please. These are the two districts I had compared. One was Kasaragod district and the Kannur district. Kasaragod higher level of illness, Kannur had lesser levels of illness. But if you see, after the triple lock was put in Kasaragod district, in comparison with Kannur district, Kasaragod, the disease went down drastically. Just go to the next slide, please. So in Kasaragod, you can see it was brought down. The red line was steeply downward. For Kannur, the disease continued to rise even long after the police deployment was started, and it was brought down though the number of diseases was much less in Kannur, it was brought down much at a slower rate. I would encourage you to look at my paper, which explains it in detail. Next slide, please. So what are the challenges to the police? Unseen enemy, it's a disease. It's not like a thief or a robber or a terrorist. He's not physically visible. You have to respond to it. Enforce public health laws, which is a very labor-intensive process. You have to deploy a lot of policemen, a high degree of risk, and it also causes resentment against the police because people don't like being told, especially people who believe they are not breaking the law, don't like being told not to come out, not to drive in a particular direction. Interagency coordination, unlike other regular police work, this requires a lot of coordination with the local self-government, with the district administration, with the health department, with the industries department, with the labor department, which creates more issues. Use of technology, we had to do a lot of CDR analysis, mobile phone tracking, etc. Use of drones, medical, understanding medical jargon and cooperating with the medical community. Another thing is that if the police work is not done efficiently, it not only has an adverse effect of failing to reduce the spread of the disease, but also results in diminished legitimacy of the police because people start hating the police for what they are doing. Next slide, please. So I would conclude by saying that COVID-19 pandemic was a challenge of a novel nature for the police. Police came up with across the country and in certain states came up with quick and new strategies to deal with the problem. Plain deployment of police would not give satisfactory results. Police work had an impact on the spread of the disease. Till the country is vaccinated completely, police will continue to have a role in preventing the spread of the disease. It will reduce the number of positive cases. It will reduce the positivity rate and the mortality rate, which is a great gift or a great advantage for society. It will reduce the load on the hospital systems and will have a consequent impact of better treatment and possibly lesser deaths and lesser casualties. Lower number of cases in an area will allow the opening of society and normalization of social interaction and help the economy. It will help people, especially the poorer people, from having a livelihood and bring back normalcy. So definitely, there is empirical evidence of the role of the police and what they have been doing. And we hope in the year within 3 to 4 months, we'll have complete vaccination. Till then, and even for a period after that, police will be burdened with the issues of control of the pandemic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for the excellent presentation, sir. Sir, it is clear from your presentation that more than the administrative authority, you are a good academician, sir. The research work is done by you in making the PPT and then the graph work, everything, it clearly shows that you are a good lecturer for us, sir. And then with respect to the role of the police, till now we were just hearing police maintains the law and order. But now it's crystal clear that they are doing something more than that. They are playing an active role in curbing the spread of the pandemic. They are trying to maintaining the social distance. They are looking into that whether the quarantine is being followed in a strict sense, and they are even assuring that there should not be any public gathering. And with respect to the triple lockdown, it's really an innovative technique. We can see that the movement within the district itself is being curtailed. From one place to another place, you have to take the pass. And again, my own experience, let me share with you, sir. I can see that from Coimbatore, I have to go to my native place of Thrissur district. I have to take the pass, e-pass for the Kerala. And in the e-pass, the first thing what they are asking me is that when you're returning back to Tamil Nadu, they don't wanted me to stay there for more than 2 or 3 days. They wanted to ensure that I'm not going to spread the virus in my own native place. I'm curtailed from moving there. So it's a wonderful job which is being done by the police authorities, and merely by having a law alone is not enough. There should be a very good implementation of the same. And that is being done by the Kerala police. Hats off to your department, hats off to you, sir. A big round of applause to you, sir, for the wonderful presentation. Thank you, sir. Now I invite Professor P. Kannan, Associate Professor, the Tamil Nadu Dr. Ambedkar Law University, deliver vote of thanks.
Are you able to hear my voice, ma'am?
Yes, sir.
Okay. First of all, I thank God, my parents, and the organizers for giving such a wonderful opportunity. I wholeheartedly thank our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Dr. K. Sandhush Kumar sir. He is not only an academician, but also a great administrator. But apart from these two things, as an administrator and as an academician, he is also a humanitarian. Sir, thank you for spending time with us. I also wholeheartedly thank Major General Manoj Kumar Bindal, Executive Director, National Institute of Disaster Management, for his constant support as well as guidance for this program. I also thank our registrar, sir, Professor Dr. B. Balaji, for his continued support for his program. We also thank our controller of examination, Professor Dr. R. Srinivasan, sir, for his guidance and for his presence. Now, we extend our heartfelt thanks to Professor Dr. Lucky George for accepting the invitation and acted as a moderator for this day. Now, I will go with the speakers and their presentation. First of all, we thank Dr. Rakita Radhakrishnan, the Head Department of Psychology, Dr. M.G.R. Janaki College for Women. Ma'am, you have started your presentation with the impact of lockdown on women. What a presentation. You classified into three categories. That's how women are affected. That is childhood, adolescent, as well as the older. Then, of course, the COVID-19 and the UN policy brief that was published in April 2020, you have got a lot of statistics and you have, give a lot of evidence for how women are being violated, their rights are violated, they are physically abused, and etc. And you have given some sort of information that nearly 232 million of women may live in poverty due to COVID-19. Ma'am, thanks for your presentation with the statistic. Now, again, I will go to and I will thank Advocate Satyasri Sarmila, High Court, a first transgender advocate. She faced some sort of issues connected with her community, then he has told that nearly two views, that is, for example, how income generation was affected, then of course, the job opportunities and etc. Now, I thank, once again, we thank Franklin Jones, that head humanitarian and emergency affairs, World Vision, that he specifically stated that the impact of COVID on women and children. And of course, he said that in March 2020, that is 70% of jobless, that the people, particularly women, lost their job. And violence towards women and girls being increased. That, of course, the direct impact of their livelihood also was affected. And not only to that, he gave he gave a lot of case studies connected with that, particularly under the various headings like child marriage, unpaid care work has increased, then access to sexual and reproductive health services more or less affected, women's health loom at large, then girls' child dropout, and of course, migration and reverse migration. Thank you, sir. We also thank Professor Dr. V. Balaji, sir, for his presence. Because when Balaji sir takes LLM class, it is an 1.5 hours lecture. The 1.5 hours lecture, more or less scriptly made with 20 minutes. And his presentation connected with the three-pillar model of sustainable development that more or less established in 2030 as a goal, to achieve that goal. And he said that, the pre-disaster management and the disaster that occurs, the immediate and etc., then post-mitigation response and etc. Then, of course, the three ideas connected with sustainability, economic, social, and environmental sustainability. I think 2.8 billion people are living in the coastal area, and he made a good presentation. Sir, thank you, sir. Now, we thank Dr. Vanilla, Assistant Professor, Department of English, Bharati Women's College, that she said that lockdown are more or less increasing and violence more or less against women is increasing. So women are unpaid workers, then disproportionate attack on women and girls, then the psychological pressures, and women sellers were faced some sort of problems. Then, of course, she has pointed out two important ideas, that is Ebola and Zika virus, particularly from Ebola, that is a crisis in Africa. Then here in lockdown period, she pointed out that 81% of the, domestic violence increased during that period. And finally, I think, as Lucky George Madam rightly pointed out that he may have a busy schedule. Sir, as an organization, we are really happy that this year you received the President's Police Medal Award for your distinguished service, sir. We once again, we are very happy to say that for your service. Now, he started and openly admitted that the Kerala, where they detected the first virus on 30th January 2020, then he said that there are two ideas how to contain that COVID-19 virus. One is the medical treatment and non-medical response. The police role regarding the non-medical response is really, probably the brainchild of the top-level policymakers in Kerala. So they made it clearly three ideas. One is the quarantine, social distancing, and lockdown. Then the police played a very important role, because traditionally, the police forces being used for investigative as well as the other purposes, maintaining law and order. So first time in the history, what he has, the police force, played a major role. As Sir rightly pointed out that, they're fighting an enemy without any face and etc. And they have successfully overcame. Because of the state's response, he clearly made that the central government, state government, and go for the district level as well as the local level, and the triple locks, as once again it is being highlighted by our moderator, ma'am. So the triple lock, that is how to contain in three levels of logs. It is rightly pointed out by our speaker today, that is Dr. T.K. Vinod Kumar sir. Sir, we are really, really happy because of your tight schedule as well as the top level management. We are really happy, and once again, we thank you, sir. Now, it is a time for internal vote of thanks. That is Professor Dr. Ravdi ma'am and Professor Kumudaratna ma'am, Professor Ramani ma'am, and Professor Dr. J. Mahalakshmi ma'am, and Professor Dr. B. Bhuvaneshwari, Professor Dr. P. Harita Devi, and Professor Dr. P. Balamurugan, Professor Dr. Rajit Oman Abraham, Professor Dr. S. Yelumalai, Professor D. Kannan, Professor Dr. P. Saktivel, Professor Dr. S. Rajalakshmi, Professor Dr. D. Uma Maheshwari, Professor Dr. C. Ilayaraja, Professor Dr. Lucky George, Professor Dr. S. Manjula, Professor Dr. A. Vijay Lakshmi, Professor Dr. P. Brunda, Professor Dr. P. Vasanta Kumar, Professor Dr. M. Sunil Gladson, Professor Dr. J. M. Velmurugan, Professor Dr. A. Sandhya Kumar, and Professor Dr. Sankita ma'am. Then Professor Dr. S.K. Ashok Kumar sir, Library Science, and Dr. A. Bhagavati, Assistant Librarian, and Dr. K. Paramasivam, Assistant Director. Then I would like to thank about the organizing convener. My special thanks to Professor D. Jaishankar sir, because he is a pillar of one of the pillar of the program. And I always wanted to, it is a vote of thanks. So I wanted to convey my heartfelt thanks to Professor Rahul Rehu, Assistant Professor in our university, and Dr. Ajinder Walia, Assistant Professor in National Institute of Disaster Management, and other coordinator like Dr. M.C. Chinu, Assistant Professor in Economics, Tamil Nadu Dr. Ambedkar Law University, and Mr. Karpura Sundara Pandian, Assistant Professor, National Institute of NIDM. Then Dr. P.R. Deepa Lakshmi, Assistant Professor, Dr. M. Nirmal Kumar, Assistant Professor, Mr. S. Marudhu Vijayan, Assistant Professor, Mrs. Petuna Chidar, Assistant Professor, and Mrs. J. Nitya, Assistant Professor, and Mr. Manimuli, Assistant Professor. Ma'am, it is my pleasure finally to thank Sarvani ma'am. See, in that lockdown, only 2 persons approached me. One is Dr. P. Balamurugan sir, that he wanted to do a program and etc. But because Professor Balamurugan sir always some sort of maintaining some sort of a standard, whether I am up to the mark or not. But when Sarvani madam called me, I have no, because madam know very well about that, one of the senior professor from 2002. So I accepted. I don't know, I did my duty really or not. But thank you, ma'am, for giving me an opportunity. Once again, I personally thank. May God bless all. Thank you. Now over to moderator, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the vote of thanks.
Yes, ma'am.
Madam.
Okay. Thank you, Lucky, for doing a very good